Wilmington was one of those important centers for newly freed people to find opportunity.
There was really no other major city in the South like Wilmington. First of all, it had a majority black population of 56%.
They have the opportunity to compete with whites for well-paying jobs for both skilled and unskilled labor. So we see African Americans working as brick masons, blacksmiths, carpenters.
You have folks who are stevedores working on the docks. You're having the black leadership that have college degrees.
There was a professional class there of doctors and teachers and lawyers.
You've got the array of hard-working black folk up and down the class line. It was a real community.
One interesting aspect of Wilmington was that blacks sold items at the city market downtown alongside whites, and this was highly unusual.
They are operating on terms of equality. White vendors are having to compete with black vendors for customers. And one of the most prominent black businessmen in the 1890s was a man by the name of Isham Quick.
My name is Inez Campbell Eason. I am the great-great-granddaughter of Isham Quick. He was born in 1843. At the end of slavery, he sojourned up to North Carolina, ended up in Wilmington. He was a wood and coal dealer at the time. He also chartered a black-owned bank called the Metropolitan Trust Company.
This was quite significant that African Americans had not only began to acquire large sums of money, but that they were able to invest them in black banks. We see large numbers of black business owners, large numbers of black homeowners. Wilmington is essentially a promised land for African Americans. It's during Reconstruction that we get the 14th Amendment guaranteeing citizenship to African Americans. And then we have this 15th Amendment that said that one's right to vote could not be abridged on the basis of race. So it's the 15th Amendment that gives black men access to the ballot. During Reconstruction, we see numerous black men able to hold public office at multiple levels of government. We see black men serving in the North Carolina General Assembly. North Carolina would send black men to Congress. We saw African American men not only being able to take part in the political process, but serving in the halls of power.
What we have during Reconstruction is a lot of white anger at black people seizing their freedom. You've got a lot of the white population that is very frustrated with not only losing slavery, but seeing African Americans go from being enslaved people to thriving, to becoming landowners, to serving in office.
The Confederacy felt that it had been overthrown, and it was trying to take power back.
That war is still going on. This war after the Civil War, this war on African Americans' freedom.
Black men having the right to vote just angered white supremacists 8 ways to Sunday. And so you had massive intimidation at the polls. This is where you get the rise of white domestic terrorism in the form of the KKK, the Klu Klux Klan.
You've got these organized attacks on black people, a lot of assassinations on black voters and black office holders, home invasions, where they're deliberately targeting African Americans who are very successful.
While there are these white supremacy campaigns statewide, there was a secret group determining their own ways of promoting a white supremacy agenda here in Wilmington.
A group of 9 citizens met at the home of Mr. Hugh McRae, and there decided that the attitude and actions of the Negroes made it necessary for them to take some steps towards protecting their families and homes in their immediate neighborhood, 7th and Market Streets. This group of citizens, the Secret 9, divided the city into sections, placing a responsible citizen as captain in charge of each area. The better element planned to gain relief from Negro impotence and domination, from grafting, and from immoral conditions. Jesse Blake, Wilmington resident.
It's a lot sexier to say the Secret Nine than it is to say the Chamber of Commerce, that it's really just the white business community that we're talking about.
These were very elite white men. Hugh McRae came from one of the more prominent business families in Wilmington.
I'm Meg McRae. I'm the great-granddaughter of Hugh McRae. You know, there's a certain population of the people here that didn't like what was happening with the fusionist government. You know, my understanding of Wilmington at the time, at 1898, was that it was sort of like a mecca of sorts, like African-American businesses, white businesses, all thriving. He was part of the population that didn't so much like that.
These men would meet to discuss problems their businesses were having as a result of the decisions of the Board of Aldermen and the mayor.
There is a concern for maintaining their wealth, of wanting to ensure that they remained at the top of the social order. There could not be biracial forms of government that required them to compete with African Americans for anything. White people in Wilmington who supported white supremacy still had to figure out a way to get rid of the fusionist political leaders who controlled the city. It was really a matter of how they were going to carry out this plan, not if they were going to carry out the plan.
They saw themselves really as New South men. As much as they revere their dads who fought in the Civil War and got the South into the Civil War, they're determined not to be their dads. They're determined to solve this, quote, Negro problem once and for all, and to do a better job of it than their fathers did.
The McRae castle, you know, was a very grand house. He was the neighbor to the Saguars, to one of the oldest, most established, most cultured and sophisticated black families in Wilmington. It's just the intimacy and proximity. You know, your neighbor is having a meeting about how to overthrow you and your family and your friends and your whole community, about how to shut that down.
Through the summer and fall of 1898, the white supremacists perpetuated this myth that it was black citizens who were arming themselves and preparing for a takeover.
It was a fabrication of the News and Observer and of others to foment fear and make people react.
When in fact, it was the whites buying guns and arming themselves. White men and boys in Wilmington were armed with multiple weapons each.
Sales of Winchester rifles are skyrocketing. All of these white people are buying these rifles. Meanwhile, stores that sell ammunition are not selling to black people deliberately. They're told not to.
They had units patrolling every single ward in Wilmington. It was sending the signal to the white community as well as to the black community.
The white people have been told the Negroes are going to start a race riot. My great-grandfather was an Episcopal minister. They lived downtown about a block from the courthouse. During 1898, my great-grandmother wrote a letter to her son, who's my grandfather, who was off at school. It is now nearly 11 o'clock. Perfect quiet reigns in the streets.
Henry and Bradley, the uncles, are sitting downstairs in the dining room with arms. The town is to be guarded by 4 or 8 men at each corner. Bradley has a beautiful pistol. Henry, a gun and pistol. Then ours, your father has. That leaves none for Lucy and me, but I saw that the hatchets were handy.
In our own family documents, it was written down. The black population was going to rise up, and all the white people were arming themselves. And my great-grandfather was one of the people doing that. My name is Lucy McCauley, and my great-grandfather was William Barry McCoy. He had gone to Princeton. He was a lawyer. He later became the Grand Master of the Masons in town, the Masonic Lodge. He was one of the heads of these white government unions.
The white government union was created by the Democratic Party, almost like a political action committee
the White Government Union Constitution. The purpose of the organization shall be to reestablish in North Carolina the supremacy of the white race.
The white supremacy campaign also had two militias at their disposal, the Wilmington Light Infantry and the Naval Reserves. They were supposed to report to the governor in Raleigh, who was a Republican, but in fact, the commanders of these two militias were leaders of the white supremacy campaign. In the summer of 1898, both militias, all white, were called up for federal service in the Spanish-American War. But the leaders of the white supremacy campaign made sure they were back in Wilmington before the midterm election.
There is a statewide regiment of black soldiers that is also deployed. The white regiments are sent home, but the black regiment is still held in reserve far from Wilmington. This leaves the black community unprotected.
The city's merchants wanted to make sure they had enough firepower to overwhelm the majority black population, so they brought a Colt rapid-fire gun, which was a new weapon then. It was basically one of the first machine guns. The merchants also bought something called a Hotchkiss gun and provided it to the Naval Reserves, and they mounted that as well on a wagon.
So they're preparing for war. That's what this period is. Preparation for war.
I am Ann Keenan, and William R. Keenan was my great-grandfather's uncle. He was a captain of the Wilmington Light Infantry. He had lost his position as customs collector in Wilmington to John Dancy. He was put in charge of one of the Colt rapid-fire machine guns.
They take a couple of members of the black leadership out on this boat just to show them what this gun can do.
Before Election Day, business leaders rounded up several of Wilmington's leading black citizens and brought them on a tugboat next to Eagles Island, where Captain Keenan and his fellow light infantry soldiers demonstrated the power of the Colt gun by lacing the opposite riverbank with 500 rounds of gunfire, ripping through the brush and gouging out holes in the soft earth.
White supremacists win in a landslide statewide. They are able to take back the North Carolina General Assembly. They are able to win key races in every county in the state.
November 9th, Wilmington wakes up to a complete change in representation in Raleigh and in Washington, D.C.
Even though they had been quite successful in stealing an election, in Wilmington, white supremacists are not satisfied. They don't even spend time really celebrating their successes at the ballot box because there was still work to be done.
There wasn't a municipal election. There was a state election and a county election. So you still had this fusionist mayor. You still had black aldermen.
So they had to figure out a way to make these people disappear. And not only these black men, but their white allies, white men who had supported fusionist politics, also had to disappear.
There was a mass meeting called that morning.
There will be a meeting of the white men of Wilmington this morning at 11 o'clock at the courthouse. A full attendance is desired, as business in the furtherance of white supremacy will be transacted.
Hundreds of white supremacists, both the rank and file and the white leadership, met and declared a white Wilmington Declaration of Independence.
Believing that the Constitution of the United States contemplated a government to be carried on by an enlightened people, believing that its framers did not anticipate the enfranchisement of an ignorant population of African origin, and believing that those men of the state of North Carolina who joined in forming the Union did not contemplate for their descendants subjection to an inferior race, we, the undersigned citizens of the city of Wilmington and county of New Hanover, do hereby declare that we will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin.
They're saying that in order to have good government, it has to be run by white people. That white supremacy is a way to save the state, if not save the South, and ultimately save the nation.
Hugh McRae played a key role in this document.
These upper-class white men, it aired their grievances in many ways.
From now on, all jobs will be reserved for whites. We're going to run the city, and Alex Manley must leave town, and his newspaper must shut down.
These resolutions were unanimously approved by the meeting. Followed by a wonderful demonstration, the assemblage rising to its feet and cheering, "Right, right, right." And there were cries of "Fumigate the city with a record" and "Lynch Manley." Jesse Blake, Wilmington resident.
And another one, and another one. It's so gorgeous. It's another beautiful day in North Carolina, y'all. Y'all should really be here to see it. You know what I'm saying? The beast is pumping out the system.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy, the Worthless Negro from Virginia. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, October 17, 2025. So I have been told. I think we are about 30 years out from the Million Man March, if that means anything to anyone. No black females allowed. Audio segment number 2 on Evelyn Williams, again the aunt of the late Assata Shakur. Her memoir, Inadmissible Evidence, the story of the African-American trial lawyer who defended the Black Liberation Army. We are picking up on chapter 3. Number 1, the song playing in the background, Little Brother, Beautiful Morning, North Carolina's own. I don't think they did no songs about Susan Smith. Anyway, the audio segments we heard at the beginning from the documentary film American Coup, Wilmington, 1898. That is a PBS documentary, somewhat recent. Many voices, people in the film. Author David Zucchino, author Carol Anderson, author Robin D.G. Kelly, author and former Cow's guest, suspected racist Glenda Gilmore, many others. We talked to Christopher Everett, his own documentary film about the Wilmington slaughter as well. Again, I still remain flabbergasted, in fact even more so because now we have read both Assata Shakur's memoir and we are at the beginning of Evelyn Williams' memoir, where they both discuss the history of racism in Wilmington, North Carolina, and neither book mentions the Wilmington coup. Black people are not experts on racism, and also this again, frequently these sort of terroristic events happen and black people are warned not to talk about all this. That's it. We did hear some important tidbits, just giving back context really to the people that we're hearing about in this memoir. Importantly, they said that there are no graves for this event. We got all these deaths and killing and white people bragging about their firepower, even rumors that there might be a mass grave, and there's research to find that. Wow. Also, I thought that was important because in the context of the Wilmington coup, they lied and said that black people were going to get firearms and going to commit all this violence against white people, and oh my goodness, the niggers are going, to run amok. And in actuality, that was not true. They had deliberately sought to make sure that black people could not protect themselves. All the while, white people were stockpiling extraordinary firearms and, in fact, refusing to sell weapons to black people, not just keeping black soldiers away from Wilmington. See, I thought that was an important parallel for what was going to happen with the Black Liberation Army, and oh my goodness, the Negroes and Black Panthers, they're just black identity extremists. They are running amok and they got all these guns and they're going to come kill all the white people. Like, what are you talking about? stop. Apparently, that's been one in the playbook forever. Lie and say that the black people got all kinds of guns and they're going to come and kill us all when we know they don't have a pea shooter. Don't even have a pea, really. Delectable Negro. Anyway, theft of property is important here as well, because we were talking about the wealth or lack thereof in Wilmington. We heard even some of that last week. There is a reason for that. Usual suspects. I'm so excited to hear more information about COINTELPRO. Also, we had multiple listeners say, make sure let's slow their narration down. This is AI generated, so that will happen. Now, you will have to be patient for one brief portion at the beginning, but you will hear, slow down. Hopefully that will make it easier for folks to process. Without further ado, Evelyn Williams Inadmissible Evidence, the Katherine Massey Book Club Context of White Supremacy audio segment 1.
Chapter 3. Just before the end of World War II, immediately after I graduated from Brooklyn College, I passed the civil service examination for social investigator for the Department of Welfare. Political favoritism had not yet corrupted civil service. Appointments were made in order of placement on the test. Andy had come in first. Caseloads were assigned to investigators according to their religion, not their race, and since there were few black Catholics, the mothers and children I supervised under the Aid to Dependent Children program were primarily white. My job was to determine whether or not the poor families were poor enough to be entitled to financial assistance, whether or not they were sick enough to be entitled to free medical care, and whether or not they were hiding assets received from a contributing boyfriend or an absent, impoverished, but occasionally lucky husband who helped with food or rent or clothes for the children. On home visits, I refused to notice signs of extra income like a pair of cheap shoes on the feet of small children or to make the required inspection of the refrigerator that might have revealed an extra dozen eggs or 2 bottles of milk instead of 1. My first assignment was the Lower East Side. When I climbed over drunken white men lining the narrow hallways to reach the apartment of the family I was to visit, saw the tiny cold water flats with 1 bathroom to a floor, inhabited by 7 or 8 people, the walls marred by stained, peeling paint, rats scampering at my entrance. When I forced myself to perch on the edge of soiled sofas with escaped stuffing and crawling roaches and listened to pleas for help, I saw unredeemed, abject submission to poverty for the first time in my life. There was no uncombed hair in my childhood, no unwashed bodies, no baggy-eyed babies. Although my mother urged me to quit after my first day when she saw me sitting halfway up the stairs of our house crying in disbelief, I stayed. I was determined to somehow forge a difference. And I did, but only on a case-by-case basis, and after 4 years, realized that I would never make a significantly positive impact on this pathologically destructive agency. I took the civil service examination for probation officer in New York City Children's Court, a job that paid the same but held out the promise of greater satisfaction. I came out number 1 on the list and was hired in 1950. But I didn't realize then that I had only substituted one imperfect arena for social change with another. The endless stream of petitions that allege the same kinds of neglect, abusive parents, incapable parents, alcoholic parents, all poor and all defeated by the mere process of existing in a society that had failed to touch their lives except with rejecting hands, made it impossible for me to feel any gratification from the small results I was able to achieve. Frequently, I could not recommend that children remain at home with their parents, but at the same time available institutional space was dwindling, and relatives, overwhelmed by their own problems, were unable to accept additional children into their homes. After 2 years, I could no longer delude myself that I could stop the cycle of crises on which their lives revolve. In an attempt to center my life with a career that would sustain it in a meaningful way, I applied for admission to St. John's University Law School. St. John's was a logical choice for me because it was a block away from the Children's Court in Brooklyn where I had been assigned, and it was one of the few law schools that offered night classes toward a degree. Despite the fact that I was 29 years old, I plunged into this new direction of hope, a career in law, without a second thought. But law school was very demanding. St. John's method for determining eligibility for admission, whether in the day or evening session, was to weigh both the LSAT score and collegiate grades. To continue in the program and ultimately to graduate, you had to place in the top 2/3 each year or be dropped from the school. My entering class of 500 was prepared at orientation for failure, and the school delivered on its promise. Only 150 for students from my class graduated, including only 2 blacks, a man and me. The difficulty of functioning competently in both law school and my job was compounded in 1954 when I was appointed to investigate a petition of neglect filed on behalf of the children of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who had been found guilty of conspiracy to commit espionage during World War II, sentenced to death and executed. The large rallies in support of the Rosenbergs prior to their execution, the many appeals from the controversial sentence imposed by the Jewish federal judge, Irving Hoffman, and the international attention given the case were still fresh in my mind as I read the petition, filed by the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, based on the allegations of the Commissioner of Welfare. Before the Rosenbergs were arrested in August 1950, the children, Michael and Robert, ages 10 and 6, had been living with their maternal grandmother, Tessie Greenglass, in New York City. While the parents were facing charges of treason, they voluntarily committed the children to the custody of the Department of Welfare, which placed them in the Hebrew Children's Home. On March 29, 1951, the parents were found guilty, and 4 months later, the boys were released to the permanent custody of their paternal grandmother, Sophie Rosenberg. The petition alleged that, contrary to an agreement between the Department of Welfare and Sophie Rosenberg, she permitted the children to leave the state of New York with their parents' attorney, Emanuel Block, and to live with a family in Toms River, New Jersey. After Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were executed on June 19, 1953, the Department of Welfare learned their children were in New Jersey and demanded that Block return them to New York, which he refused to do. Following his death in January 1954, the children lived with Abel and Ann Mearopolis on Riverside Drive in New York City. The petition charged the Mearopolis with retaining the children without legal right and contrary to law because no legal guardian had been appointed by a court of competent jurisdiction. The petition further alleged that since the children had been removed from their grandmother's custody, they had been exploited and made subjects of propaganda by persons seeking to raise funds, and that, in their present environment, they are further exposed to such exploitation. I was chosen to investigate the case on the recommendation of my supervisor, Gertrude O'Connor, and because my designated religion and my race were both considered politically neutral qualities during the Red Scare perpetrated by Senator Joseph McCarthy and J. Edgar Hoover. On February 17, 1954, the day the petition was filed, Judge Jacob Pankin ordered that the children be placed in the Jewish Child Care Association's Pleasantville School in upstate New York. They remained there until the following day when their attorney appealed Pankin's decision, and the Supreme Court of the state of New York reversed the ruling and released the children to Sophie Rosenberg, pending the findings of Children's Court concerning the allegations in the neglect petition. Pankin, a short, scraggy, white-haired man, unexpectedly found himself in the middle of a jurisdictional as well as a personal dispute. He joined forces with the Jewish Board of Guardians, whom he had appointed the children's temporary guardian and who had pressured me from the beginning of my investigation to recommend institutionalization. Before my investigation was complete, Pankin called me into his chambre and threatened to fire me if I did not follow that recommendation. I made a choice to base my decision concerning my future recommendations for the children solely on my own investigative findings, and the hell with the job. I reviewed all of the information available to me, visited Sophie Rosenberg, and responded positively to her genuine esprit of love for the children. I visited the Mearopolis Abel, a freelance Hollywood writer who composed the song, The House They Live In. And Ann, a former New York City school teacher and director of a California nursery school, and I was convinced that their only concern was what was best for the children. I spent a long time with both children in their grandmother's small, clean apartment and found Michael to be as talkative as Robert was reticent. I found both boys to be talented, exceptionally intelligent, and lacking any discernible behavior disorders. I found only excellent school reports, religious involvement, and no evidence of hostile, alien, or treasonable influences. I was determined to ensure that they remained with their grandmother. I believed that the Mirapoles were equally qualified to provide them with love, which was the most important ingredient they needed, having been torn from both parents in the most brutal of permanent separations. But I also knew that the best chance of avoiding institutional placement was to recommend that they remain with a relative. And I knew that the Mirapoles would continue to be an important factor in the children's lives if they were permitted to remain with their grandmother. I had seen too many children delivered to the confines of institutional indifference, and I hoped I would be able to support my conviction that they, like all children, should live with loving relatives. But I was careful. The investigation had to provide an objective foundation to support my recommendation, and I strove to achieve that. When I saw Gloria Agrin, the children's attorney, in the tiny courthouse elevator, we carefully avoided each other's eyes, neither acknowledging that I would make the critical evaluation she was waiting to challenge. I did recommend that the children remain with their grandmother, but before Pankin had an opportunity to act on it, the Commissioner of Welfare, the petitioner unwilling to allow my report to be the basis for the court's decision, withdrew his petition of neglect. Jurisdiction over custody of the children then became the sole province of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, and Justice James McNally borrowed me from Children's Court to conduct his investigation. But the state had not yet relinquished its determination to remove the children from their grandmother's care and institutionalize them. Within days after it had withdrawn its petition from Children's Court, the state filed a new one in Surrogate's Court asking that the Jewish Child Care Association be appointed as the children's legal guardian, as well as their guardian for administering a trust fund established for them by Block and left to them in his will. The legal question to be resolved was whether the trust fund was the children's property or Block's. But however that question was decided, the tactic of filing such a joint petition in Surrogate's Court, which administered estates, served the state's primary purpose to remove the resolution of the custody from the Supreme Court and thereby nullify the recommendation I had made to Judge McNally. The three courts, Children's, Supreme, and Surrogates, reached an agreement whereby all custody questions would be decided by Surrogate's Court and the other two courts would abide by its decisions. Each court had its own probation officers, and I wondered how the one who would be chosen in Surrogate's Court would respond to the challenge he or she would face. I imagined all kinds of behind-the-scene deals being made to implement the state's plan. Among the many instructions that had been given to me by the Children's Court Director of Probation were two mandates. I was not to discuss the case with anyone, and I was to be impartial and free of any emotional entanglements. But in light of the frightening and well-structured political maneuvers I was witnessing, compliance with both directives became increasingly difficult. So I spent hours in Gertrude O'Connor's office giving vent to an anguish intensified by my helplessness and fear about what I felt was a foregone conclusion. To my amazement, Surrogate's Court Judge William Collins called me into his chambers and asked if I would accept the responsibility for conducting his investigation about custody of the children. I was not just overjoyed. I was grateful to Ms. O'Connor because, although she had never mentioned it, there was no question in my mind that she had been instrumental in his choice. I slept even fewer hours than I normally did as I went to law school and maintained my other cases in Children's Court. I worked late into the night visiting suburban relatives who were employed and unavailable during the day and rushed to meet the deadline for completion of my report. When I submitted the report to Judge Collins, he asked me to be present in the courtroom on the day he rendered his decision. The court was packed with the press, lawyers, and a curious public. He read his decision into the record, awarding custody to the grandmother, Sophie Rosenberg, with whom the children would live, and appointed as co-guardian the dean of the New York School of Social Work, Kenneth D. Johnson. Judge Collins said that he had rejected institutional care because it could not substitute for the warm and sympathetic atmosphere of a private home. Next to parental care, he said, came the devotion and interest of close relatives who could shield the children from taunts and shadows of the past as well as the darts of the present. Mrs. Rosenberg loves the children and the children love her. He praised the objectivity and thoroughness of my investigation, and I was given a meritorious award by the New York State Department of Social Work for my performance on the case. In a very brief space of time, the children had become central to my life, their destinies almost an obsession, but after the decision, I never saw them again. The Rosenberg case was my first direct experience of the complicity between the judiciary and official government agencies that can result in manipulation of the fairness principle, a danger to which the judicial system is allegedly immune. And it was the first time I was exposed to the way in which lives, especially those that have been the focus of national attention and fall within judicial jurisdiction, can be permanently altered by prejudice and arbitrary decisions. The experience had prepared me, however, to walk through the corridors of justice with open eyes when I became a lawyer. Chapter 4. On a hot and humid day in August 1959, surrounded by white faces, I sat alongside my family at the swearing-in ceremony for admission to the bar and listened to the presiding judge of the Court of Appeals project a future in which all graduates would participate. His words were brilliant with promise, bathed with the benediction of commitment to the ideals of the oath we took to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the legal canon of ethics. He passed a clear mandate to the chosen, all of us, to march forward, to carry the banner of our profession high, to redress legal injustices, to meet the challenge of our times, and so forth. I was, however, less than impressed because all of his lofty hopes did not apply to me. I watched my parents beam with the same pride radiating from the faces of the white parents. To them, I was now a lawyer and, therefore, guaranteed a successful future. How could they know that the number of black lawyers was so few that no effort would be made to count them until 1965, when it was learned that of the 65,000 current law students, only 700 were black, and that of those by statistical projection. Only 10% would pass the bar and enter the profession. They had no way of knowing that, in addition to a law degree, other qualifications were needed to guarantee success: graduation from a prestigious law school, selection to law review, in which a chosen few top students were invited to publish their research on arcane aspects of the law, clerkship with a U.S. Supreme Court justice, or, at the very least, with a federal judge who accepted only those who had been on law review at a prestigious school, and being white and male. Absent all of the above, employment by a large law firm was impossible, and without such an association, success was strictly accidental. The significance of that reality for me was to strengthen the choice I had already made. While I managed to get through St. John's Law School, I was not on law review, nor did I graduate at the top of my class. I did, however, make one effort to reach the apex of intellectual achievement. Since only day students were eligible for law review, I transferred from night school after my first year. To supplement the limited evening courses allowed, I accelerated my credits by attending 4 hours of classes in the morning and 4 at night. And between the hours that day classes ended and night classes began, I worked as a clerk at the J. Thorpe department store on Fifth Avenue. The part-time job enabled me, after covering my rent, to pay car fare and buy food at the automat on a strict budget of $1 a day. After a year, I weighed less than 100 pounds and was close to a complete physical breakdown. I relinquished the prospect of writing great legal theorems for the law review and returned to my job as a probation officer and to law school at night. Because there were no school loans available in those days, to pay tuition and buy books, borrow from banks and beneficial finance, repaying them on the installment plan by the end of each year so that I could borrow money for the next. After I passed the bar examination, I continued to work as a probation officer for another 2 years to complete paying my debts and to save enough money to meet expenses for at least 1 year without working. I had made my choice. I was going to be a criminal trial lawyer with my own office, free from political pressures that would compromise my representation of those charged with criminal offenses. Gertrude O'Connor, my supervisor in family court, believed I had made the wrong decision, pointing out that with the law degree I could attain the highest position possible in the department, that of chief probation officer. I appreciated her advice, but nothing she said swayed me. My decision to become a criminal trial lawyer was encouraged by Eugene Kinkle Jones, himself a criminal trial lawyer. I had met Gene in 1955 when I had taken a one-year leave of absence from family court to participate in an experimental program in the Court of General Sessions, at that time the criminal division of the New York State Supreme Court. The pilot project was designed to reduce recidivism of first-time offenders between the ages of 19 and 21 who were also substance abusers by expanding probation to include psychiatric counseling, job referrals, and other rehabilitative efforts. Caseloads were very small and probationers were seen frequently. The program had excited me as an alternative to prison, and with a little help from Ms. O'Connor, I was allowed the one-year sabbatical. I met Gene when he came to my office in General Sessions Court to discuss the progress of one of his clients whom was supervising. He was one of the few lawyers who bothered to discuss their client's progress once sentence had been imposed and their FEs had terminated. We became close friends. Gene also became my legal mentor, and at every possible occasion I would watch his courtroom performances from the spectator row behind the front bench marked "For Lawyers Only," anticipating the day when I, too, would sit there. Those were the days when the poor were represented by the Legal Aid Society in exceptionally few cases, when there was no state or federally funded groups of lawyers assigned to indigent defendants, now called 18B panels. And when disheveled white lawyers roamed the corridors of the criminal court building, approaching bewildered-looking black people to find out whether they had a case in court and needed a lawyer. These lawyers took any small amount of money such people had, filed a notice of appearance in court, and pleaded them guilty. Legal representation was a shabby and indifferent process, and defendants, mostly black, demanded nothing more than an acceptable plea bargain, or at least one that had the appearance of something they could live with. A trial for these lawyers was a waste of time. They were as ignorant of trial practice as the assistant district attorneys, many of whom spent their entire careers without ever trying a single case. The few who did were vigorously prosecutorial and politically active in their pursuit of judgeships or high elected office. But for the majority, a judge's favorable ruling subsidized their careers on whichever end of the counsel table they sat. Gene was different. With gray eyes, a narrow face, and a sardonic mouth that seldom smiled, he viewed both assistant district attorneys and defense lawyers with the same dispassionate contempt. He was one of the first black lawyers who made a living from his practice in the criminal courts. Regarded as a genius by white lawyers, he blazed the trail for other black lawyers and had no heroes. The presence of his tall, well-tailored, slender body and narrow-brimmed hat discouraged familiarity. He was a loner, but I was one of the few exceptions. We remained close friends until he died on October 18, 1973, just a few years after his son's fatal crash over Long Island Sound while testing an Air Force jet plane. He was my teacher in those early years and was fortunate to be able to reciprocate his support by supplementing his trial preparation with legal research and analysis, and he felt was secondary in importance to the trial itself and for which I accepted no monetary compensation. To gain experience, I appeared during arraignments every day, including weekends, and offered to represent defendants free of charge. Place my name on a list provided by the court for volunteer private lawyers, and judges quickly recognized me as a golden resource, despite their frequent irritation with my multiple motions and refusal to enter into plea bargains. I read all new U.S. Supreme Court decisions and applied them to the cases I handled. One of my proudest moments was when aided Judge Hyman Barchet, later to become the ultimate authority on hearings to suppress illegally obtained evidence. In 1961, when U.S. Supreme Court rendered its decision in Mapp v. Ohio, few judges and even fewer criminal trial lawyers understood how the ruling was to be applied. When would the motion to suppress illegally obtained evidence be made? Should a hearing on the motion be held before the trial or during the trial, just before the evidence was to be offered? Should the motion be oral or written? Before the full implications of the Supreme Court decision were understood, I represented one of the first applications of the landmark decision before Judge Barchet. We decided on a course of action. The motion would be written and the hearing would be held before trial. If the motion was granted, the evidence would be excluded. And if that evidence constituted the sole evidence to prove the prosecutor's case, the indictment would be dismissed. When the indictment of the defendant irrepresented was dismissed, I shared this major victory with Gene. Thereafter, I became his consultant on exclusionary pretrial motion practice, which the decisions of the Supreme Court were rapidly expanding. By the end of my first year, I had gained valuable experience. I learned to decount protestations of innocence and instead depended on investigation to determine whether the allegations of the complaint or indictment could be proved. I went to the crime scene and made notes of obvious inconsistencies with the accusatory document. I found witnesses and obtained statements from them. I filed motions to dismiss indictments, an unheard of practice in those days. My resources were meager, but each time I went to trial, I established that the prosecution either could not prove its case or had no case. The defendants irrepresented, many of whom were Fasingo jury for the first time in their lives, believed in me. By the end of my first year, I felt confident enough to try a murder case. A case was assigned to me by the court. The defendant not only was poor, alcoholic, and unknown, but was indicted for murdering another poor, unknown person. We'll never forget this man's unfocused, bleary-eyed attempts to convince me of his innocence. He was accused of strangling a female drinking companion by fracturing her cricoid cartilage, which resulted in death by suffocation. In addition to interviewing all persons who might have some information, evaluating their credibility in the event they would be used as witnesses, and making the usual pretrial motions, I spent hours in the medical libraries across the city learning about the structure of the throat and the cricoid cartilage, about which I had never heard. After reading the medical examiner's report, I was as convinced that my client was telling me the truth as I was convinced that the prosecutor could not prove that death was intentional. My client insisted on going to trial, rejecting the many offers he relayed to him from the district attorney's office of a reduced sentence in exchange for a guilty plea. He told me he would rather go to jail than confess to a crime he didn't commit. I had never before borne the responsibility of defending a person faced with a sentence of 25 years to life, but his faith that I would make the right decisions carried me over every hurdle. Together we would win, whether or not we could. The most incriminating evidence against him was the medical examiner's testimony. I cross-examined him for 3 days. At the end of the prosecutor's case, I moved for dismissal off indictment because the prosecutor had failed to produce evidence to establish the fact that the deceased had died from strangulation or, in fact, that a homicide had been committed. The judge recessed to consider my motion. I assumed Wynn did not make the decision instantly, as was the usual case, that he had called a recess just for a cigarette break. The first time his clerk came to me with an offer of a reduced charge, I was stunned. But the process continued all day. The offer was reduced from murder to manslaughter 1 to manslaughter 2 to assault as a felony to assault as a misdemeanor with credit given for time already served. The last offer meant that my clients will be released immediately. He refused each offer, but I wasn't so sure he was making the right decision. I held my breath as I communicated the last no to the clerk, and the two of us waited for the judge's decision. It was at the end of the day by now, but the usual courtroom observers, retired people who spent their days watching trials in criminal court and who considered themselves experts in predicting a jury's verdict, having learned of this unusual situation, had collected from the various courtrooms in the building and congregated in the hall discussing possible alternatives for the judge. When the motion was granted and the indictment dismissed, the spectators roared with approval. Together, my client and I walked through the revolving doors of the criminal court building. He saw the sun setting from outside prison walls for the first time in over a year. His eyes were clear now and sparkled with the strange sensation of hope. I remember his name to this day, although I've never seen him since. Except for a few lines in the Amsterdam News, there was no newspaper report of the dismissal. But I keep that short paragraph as the most positive punctuation my first year of practice could have produced. I had proven my ability as a criminal defense trial lawyer. Now I needed to make a living from it. Chapter 5. By the end of my first year, judges no longer directed me to leave the well of the courtroom when I entered to check the calendar or file a notice of appearance. Court officers no longer ordered me from the first bench reserved for lawyers. Court clerks no longer asked me what law firm I was filing papers for. And assistant district attorneys initiated negotiations with me for disposition of cases. Had met the challenge of being black, female, and a criminal trial lawyer. Historically, lawyers have been classified by the clients who retain them. The average criminal lawyer defends poor, black, alcoholic, or drug-related transgressors, and the contempt society holds for the powerless is transferred to the lawyers who represent them. The corporate criminal is charged with white-collar crime and is usually represented by former U.S. attorneys who cash in on their expertise in the manipulation of evidence and other dirty tricks learned on the federal payroll. But they are perceived as respectable and smart. Their clients always have a shot at beating the system. When we criminal trial lawyers win, it is indeed against all odds. As my reputation grew, I began to make enough money to establish an office that would reflect the respect I held for my clients. Despite the tentative steps I took in that direction, I made no change in my personal living arrangements. I remained in the large, unpretentious, pleasant one-room apartment with kitchen, bath, and backyard that I had lived in for the last 8 years. It was near Central Park and convenient to every means of transportation. Suburban life, with the endless waits for buses to get to crowded subways to get to school or jobs in the city, was as tedious as the long, boring hours spent as a child watering the lawn with a hose before the age of automatic sprinklers. Completely free of envy, I watched the stream of cars making their daily escape routes across bridges and through tunnels into and out of the city from and to the suburbs. My first office in 1959 was located in the rear of a greeting card store on Reed Avenue in Brooklyn. From there, I moved to an office that I shared with a female lawyer friend, also black, across the street from the Brooklyn Criminal Court building on Schermerhorn Street, to Lawyers Row on Court Street in Brooklyn, to 55 Liberty Street in the Wall Street area near the office of Carson D. Witt Baker, a black lawyer most remembered for his defense of Hulan Jack, the first black Manhattan borough president, on charges of corruption. When I signed the Liberty Street lease, the space was restructured to meet my personally requested dimensions. Bookcases were concealed, the paint was in soft earth tones, and the furniture, which I bought, was made of modern Scandinavian wood. My office was immense, but the floor-to-ceiling windows, covered with drawn curtains, created a confidential and friendly atmosphere. The secretary's office was designed for efficiency, and I hired an excellent man who not only was proficient in shorthand and typing but kept track of my court and appointment schedules, placated irate clients when I was delayed in court, and watched over me with protective concern. I joined bar associations and volunteered to conduct a legal clinic in the office of Mark Southall, a maverick Harlem political leader who had stretched the power of his office to help his constituents. I helped consumers who had been given default judgments for failure to appear in court for alleged non-payment of debts, often because a summons was not served and the consumers were unaware of a court date. I devised short forms they could use to reopen their cases and 3 times a week held classes in self-representation in landlord-tenant court. When evictions were threatened and the cases became more complicated, I appeared in court myself. I rarely shopped or ate at home, except for coffee, because my large meal for the day was at lunchtime with Jean. Sometimes at the end of the day, we shared frustrations for an hour or so over martinis. During the summer, when the courts practically closed down, I spent days at Atlantic City or on Fire Island. On weekends, I hung out at favorite Harlem bars where my friends met, the Red Rooster, Jock's Place, Fax, or Carl's Corner. And I ate breakfast on Sunday mornings with Romari Bearden at Frank's restaurant. My lifestyle changed dramatically, however, when Joey came to live with me and my new responsibilities left me with little extra time. The next 5 years, from 1960 to 1965, were an economic roller coaster, hurtling me unpredictably either upward or downward, depending on whether my clients paid me. Unlike large law firms, whose yearly retainers from businesses cushioned them during lean years, when I was not paid, I had no extra resources to tide me over. Clients seemed to be ignorant of the fact that the expenses necessary to maintain a law office were the same as those needed by their doctors and dentists. But when the relatives or friends of loved ones who had just been arrested called me in panic desperation to represent them, I could not say no. Unlike other contractual arrangements, once a lawyer files a notice of appearance with the court declaring that he or she has been privately retained by the defendant, it cannot be withdrawn without approval of the court. And because I accepted small retainers toward the larger fee, which was seldom paid, I had a plethora of clients, a paucity of funds, and a pyramid of work. Large law firms not only demand that an entire fee be paid before they accept a case, but their attorneys also chair important committees in national bar associations which only recently admitted black attorneys as members and set the ethical standards for the legal community. When such associations, in their annual statements on legal representation for the poor, urge corporate lawyers to volunteer some small part of their time to represent the needy, called pro bono work, they aren't speaking to the black single practitioner or the small black law firm. For us, pro bono is a way of life. In addition, the types of cases available to black lawyers were limited. Few of us were personal injury specialists because black victims of accidents, with rare exceptions, chose white lawyers to handle their claims. And of course, so did white victims. Black lawyers who made a living either handle real estate transactions, were beneficiaries of the political patronage system, or were affiliated with churches with large congregations, a ready-made source of clientele. And then there were the criminal lawyers who depended in large part on referrals from bondsmen, numbers bankers, or narcotics dealers. On one occasion, I was approached by a numbers banker to represent all the runners on his payroll who were arrested. These cases, with the exception of loitering violations, which included prostitution, constituted the majority of arrests in the lower criminal court system. The prospect of a steady source of paying clients was tempting, but that terminated as quickly as it began. The fabrication of dropsy evidence by the arresting officer was a familiar device used to make arrests and obtain convictions. In a typical case, a police officer would testify that he had made the arrest after he had observed a numbers transaction, usually from a distance through binoculars. The officer would further testify that when he approached the participants, they dropped policy slips on the ground in clear view of the officer, who then picked them up and considered the recovery justification for a search of the parties on whom more slips would be found. The officer would then make the arrest. The cop's testimony was sufficient to convict, and a plea of guilty was therefore usually entered. This scenario, with its obvious illegalities, was familiar to both judges and assistant district attorneys. Credibility was always afforded the arresting officer. But in the early 60s, Supreme Court decisions were changing the standards of admissibility of evidence resulting from searches and seizures, and dropsy evidence was becoming more and more suspect. I used every tactic and new decision available to force the prosecution to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and I usually won acquittals. What I didn't know, however, was that a deal had been struck between the banker who approached me and the police. Their agreement was that the banker would choose a few runners periodically, usually those with minor previous convictions, and give them up to an officer to enable him to meet his monthly quota of arrests. In exchange for money and protection of the banker's major business, the deal was that the runner would plead guilty and pay a small fine or serve a limited jail sentence. Legal representation was a mere formality, but it was necessary to lend legitimacy to the deal. As I began my usual preparation in defense of one particular defendant, the banker directed me to plead him guilty. When I pointed out the weakness of the prosecution's case, the situation was explained to me. Small fry runners were regularly sacrificed for the survival of the organization. If I wanted the steady income promised, I would follow the banker's instructions. As I said, that potential business relationship ended before it began. I was not willing to mouthpiece my way to economic security, and supplying my legal expertise to the Black Death peddlers of the narcotics trade was out of the question. Somewhere during this stretch of economic suicide, I decided to give up private practice and get a job. Perhaps had the only consideration been my own survival, I might have continued the struggle, but I was responsible for Joey, and my financial ability to support both of us and a law practice was diminishing with frightening rapidity. I applied to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, but nothing was available. I was, however, hired by legal aid, but I quit after a week. Despite my extensive trial experience in felony cases involving many jury trials, the legal aid people insisted that I learn to represent clients from their perspective and from the ground up. I began their training program by sitting in on arraignments. Walked out during a class conducted by a legal aid attorney who had never tried a case in the middle of his pedantic explanation of the difference between a complaint and an indictment. So in January 1965, when Livingston Wingate, the executive director of Hair U Harlem Youth Opportunities Unlimited, the Harlem Anti-Poverty Agency, asked me to establish guidelines for a legal services to the poor program for Harlem, I closed my office without regret and leaped at the opportunity to join a different battle to ensure legal justice for the disenfranchised. Hair U, spearheaded by Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., the congressman from Harlem and the pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, was established in 1964 when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act and launched his War on Poverty. The Harlem community, like every black ghetto across the country, had been destroyed by white opportunism. As whites left the surrounding inner cities, emerging middle-class inner-city blacks followed, leaving a great void for those who could neither leave nor regenerate the few remaining institutions necessary for minimal existence. A debilitating immobilization spawned apathy, distrust, hostility, and hopelessness and provided the fuel that police brutality sparked, producing the 1964 Harlem and Rochester, New York, uprisings, harbingers of the 1965 Watts, Los Angeles conflagration. In January 1965, 232,000 people lived in central Harlem. 31% were under the age of 21, with a disproportionate rate of juvenile delinquency, narcotics addiction, venereal disease, and welfare assistance. Housing units had been intentionally permitted to deteriorate under an urban renewal projection of a white-occupied Harlem planned by white politicians in City Hall. As a result, only 10% of new housing constructed in the city since 1929 was built in Harlem. More than 80% of youngsters were below grade level in reading comprehension by 6th grade, and 55% were high school dropouts. More than 2/3 of the adults were underemployed laborers earning below the annual $4,000 poverty level. And there were no statistics to reflect the number of residents victimized by illegal installment contracts, evictions, and denial of welfare and Social Security benefits because they were ignorant of their legal rights. I immersed myself in the task of establishing the Legal Services Program. I attended meetings in Washington with Office of Economic Opportunity officials, structured budgets, and developed a workable format with relative ease. But the job posed challenges for me I had never before encountered. I was required to fulfill the mandate of the Act. To establish community action programs with maximum feasible participation of the residents in the area. I was a technician accustomed to evolving strategies within the framework of my own creativity and perceptions, uncluttered by other people's intrusive suggestions and unsolicited opinions. I was inflexible to the demands of situations outside those small parameters, and I rejected carelessly presented opposition. I was not used to consulting anyone in making decisions to pursue a course of action or in altering those decisions once made to accommodate political expediency. Now, in charge of devising a program that demanded maximum participation of the residents in the area. I needed other qualifications. Needed to be a conduit for the plans submitted by others, superior to mine because of their very genesis, advanced by those who would be affected by any decision made. I was called on to be a conciliator of competing interests and duplicate programs proposed by antagonistic groups with identical goals. The major question became who would get a piece of the anti-poverty pie being baked in Washington. Additionally, because I had never lived in Central Harlem, my credentials were suspect, and my personality, at ease in a courtroom before a hostile judge or a reluctant jury, was on uncertain ground when confronted with the various community groups who justifiably demanded input. In addition to Wingate, 2 other geniuses were involved in community relations in Harlem, George Broadfield and Evelyn Payne. With their help, I learned to listen, to compromise, and to alter my decisions when convinced they needed revision. But my ultimate proposal was challenged by Paul Schiavone, a 1960 Harvard Law School graduate and former Wall Street lawyer whose only credentials for understanding the legal needs of the poor was his participation in a Mississippi summer project in 1964, and who was rewarded by being appointed the director of a neighborhood law office in 1965. He proposed that the supervisory structure for the projected neighborhood law offices in Harlem be provided by the ACLU instead of the Harlem Lawyers Association, which I had recommended. My rejection of his proposal was uncompromising. And later in 1965, when Gene Can, employed by the Office of Economic Opportunity to approve funding for proposals for legal services to the poor, came to Harlem to evaluate my proposal and insisted that I include affiliation with Columbia University Law School, I became instantly apoplectic. Her claim to expertise rested on an article she and her white husband had written for the 1964 Yale Law Review, titled The War on Poverty, A Civilian Perspective, which had received national acclaim. I admired the article but disagreed strongly with their conclusions that the neighborhood law office needed the inclusion and participation of a major law school to aid in its supervision, to provide law student interns who would use the program as a laboratory, to conduct seminars for recruiting and training indigenous community leaders, and to increase self-awareness and comprehension of larger community problems for students who were preparing for leadership roles in the war on poverty. While I understood Can's focus on the urban university's potential role, no law school had been accommodating so far, and certainly not Columbia, located in the heart of Harlem. Understood her compulsion because her article had grown out of a 2-year study of a neighborhood social services program in New Haven, Connecticut, funded by Yale Law School. For the purpose of producing the Law Review article, as well as of breaking new ground in the analysis of President Johnson's war on poverty. I did understand, but I was not to be convinced, moved, or otherwise directed. When my proposal was accepted by the HairU Board of Directors, my sense of achievement was both professional and personal. But Adam Clayton Powell, the driving force behind HairU, who had held his congressional committee meetings in the streets of Harlem, was charged with the misuse of government funds in 1967 and stripped of his 22 years of seniority, including his chairmanship of the congressional subcommittee that funded and administered the program. HairU, under siege, faltered, and my legal services to the poor proposal was never implemented. By March 1966, the extinction of HairU's bright promise became inevitable. So when my parents called to tell me that they had been betrayed by the lawyers they had hired to establish their claim to the beach lands my mother's father had owned and asked me to come to North Carolina to help them, I felt free to do so. And the fact that Joey had left high school and was now working made my decision easier.
Katherine Massey Book Club. We will stop there, resume Chapter 6, Inadmissible Evidence. Evelyn Williams. Number to dial, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Now, before I make one point, we'll get to the folks who dialed in emails. There's a news report. This is from August 24, 1973. 3, Seattle Times, Seattle Post-Intelligence, defunct Seattle newspaper. The report, a New York jury indicts woman militant. That's what they call Assata Shakur, woman militant. Man. Anyway, but that's one. Two, just doing a quick rewind to last week, and then we'll get to participants. The section from Chapter 2. Miss Williams is going through some of her family's connection to the state of North Carolina, which we'll hear about to get right into that, Chapter 6. But her family's connection to this land and the history of racism in North Carolina. She talks about the Klan and them migrating to the north, right? And she talks specifically about the section where they migrate north to New Jersey, Cranberry, New Jersey specifically. And they say, she says that her family members tell her that they had some incident, black people were there, and race soldiers came. You Negroes are going to get out of here, and ran, said, we will rape you, sodomize you. So they dumped white paint on them and kicked them out of town. I said, wow. I told folks last week, I said, man, we should take, if you got spare 5 minutes, like check, can you find anything about this incident? Did this happen? Like, what in the world? Like they painted them white? Kicked what? So I did hear, some people did contact me and say that they looked and tried to get information. I think I shared a little bit this past weekend. Now, one of those I'll chalk up to Neely Fuller Jr., who again was born October 6, 1929. Today is October 17. So he said sometimes you get signals that are just for you from the Creator. Sometimes you have to be paying attention. If you are guzzling down, Slurpees every 5 minutes, puffing menthols, sipping tequila, doing smoky puff pass, you might not catch it. But literally last Friday, as I was struggling to select which book, a little bit after 4 p.m., you can check ESPN to verify, but I'm leaving the University of Washington Library. I exit east, traveling east on foot on campus, and literally as I walk out, there is a whole gang, a literal sea of red and white. Now, the University of Washington colors, purple and gold. You don't see lots of people wearing red all at once. That is unusual. And it's fenced off, and they got chairs, and it's all nice setup. Like, what? I'm looking, and then I see Rutgers. Rutgers? What are they? Why is it? What? I'm just staying. Plus, this is in the middle of campus. I mean, literally, how central is this? This shindig is happening on the green, what shall we call it, field area in front of the building that is literally called the HUB Hub building because it's in the center of campus. So I'm like, what? So it takes me a while to finally put this together, like, oh, it's football. See, I told you all about Seattle. They have those random, oh, it's Thursday and the Seahawks are playing. Same thing with football. Normally the games are on Saturday, but sometimes they have the irregular Friday night game. That was last Friday. So it took me a while to do the math and put this, like, oh, this is a Friday night game and they're playing Rutgers. And it also took me a while to figure, because Rutgers University is in New Jersey. The University of Washington never plays them. This is that wacky realignment where now same division, we're right in the same geographic region. opposite side of the continent. Again, that white people say they're about conserving energy and green and all that, whatever. So the white people from Rutgers come all the way over here, and they got a pretty shindig in the middle of campus, and they're eating watermelon and all that. I even thought of Paul, be like, hey, man, I'm not even a student here. I like New Jersey, Garden State. Cory Booker, my cousin, That's Roz Baraka, that's my cousin, and I don't know nothing about no Assata, but Roz Baraka, that's my cousin. Yeah, let me get some of that watermelon. Let me kick it with y'all a little bit. Let me get more of that, because they had a big fruit platter. Like, man, let me get some of that fruit. I'll root with you for the whole game, as long as y'all gonna have fruit. And what kind of y'all got to drink over there? I couldn't do all that. We go do the book club, and then hear all this about Cranberry, New Jersey. Now, if I had known that going, I would have just went and asked them, anybody here from Cranberry? Anybody? We can skip the watermelon just to get to the good stuff. Once we got here and heard all of that, it clicked in my, woo, some messages are just for you, almost like the creator got to put it right in your face, because you might be lazy and not go see the brain damage football game at the stadium, which I wouldn't have. So you wouldn't have even noted that they were playing Rutgers, New Jersey. I got to put it right in your face so you don't miss it. You don't pay attention all the time. So we go do the program, hear all that about Cranberry. I said, maybe the creator wanted me to contact Rutgers to see if they know about the Cranberry situation. I contact the Rutgers library. Big campus, big university like UW. I contact the library. I send them the exact same thing we read. Rape the niggers. Sodomize the niggers. Paint the niggers white. Get out of town. Library specialist writes me back. She say, we at Rutgers have a whole Klan folder collection. KKK activity just in the Garden State. Just give me a while to go and check. I'll see what I can find. I says, great. 2 days later, she writes me back. She says, okie doke, Gus T. Narrowed it down. Looks like in Cranberry, there are 2 different incidents. This might match. I'll do a little bit more investigating. I'll send you what I find. Great. Looking forward to the PDFs. I'll share. However, I had to pause for a second. Victims, cousins, I already told you I felt some type of way, not upset at Evelyn Williams or Assata Shakur, but just, man, we have a really ignorant team. Talking about victims of racism, non-white people. We are super ignorant. The Wilmington Purge, they didn't know about that. Not in the book, right? So then when I hear this incident, and it's not enough detail for me to go like, oh my God, what is this? They were going to rape them and sodomize? Like, what? Delectable Negro? It's not enough detail. I even wondered, like, did they make this up? Maybe this didn't really happen. They didn't paint no niggers white and threaten to rape them, sodomize them if they don't leave. Maybe they just, just made up old tale to scare the black people. I was kind of thinking that, maybe, even wishful thinking, maybe, but I was thinking that. The specialists at Rutgers, maybe they were at the game last week. I don't know. But she said, I found 2 incidents that look like it might be what you all read. I'm going to go through it again, send you what I find. 2. This wasn't for the whole state of New Jersey. This was just for Cranberry. 2. Do you mean it happened twice? They booted the niggers out, threatened to castrate them, anally rape them, and paint them. You had 2 times in Cranberry where that happened? What does it mean to be white? Gus T. eagerly awaiting now. How in the world? And I sent her the exact page 24 that we read. I didn't skip, I didn't skim, I didn't send. She read the same thing we read and went and looked at their KKK file and said, looks like it could be two matches. What does it mean to be white? Now, it might have happened a bunch of times throughout the state of New Jersey. We just talking about Cranberry, and Cranberry, how far is that from Rutgers? 17 miles. It's not even a 30-minute drive. Anyway, we smacked them around good last week too. We whacked them, made them waste all that gas and time and energy, come out here and eat watermelon on our lawn. We take your brain damage and get on back out there to Newark. Tell Cory Booker I said hi, but you get that information about the sodomy and castration. Appreciate it. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let us see. Folks who dialed in with a hand up, if you have commentary to share. Let's see. Folks are, I don't know. Folks are spectating for the moment. Not sure. I'll get some of the folks who emailed and check back with hands. Let's see. Email number 1. Okay. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. I just finished reading the Assata biography first time and listening to the C.O.W.S broadcast, reading and discussing of it second time. I was excited to learn that this would be the next book club selection. I was not familiar with either of these texts until I started listening to the C.O.W.S. I could not find anything about the Cranberry Massacre. More to come. Chapter 3. Civil service exam. I had come in first. Examination for probation officer, law school. Only 154 students graduating, including 2 blacks, a man, and me. Impressive work. 2. I supervised under the Dependent Children Program, where primarily white. My job was to determine whether or not poor families were poor enough to be entitled to financial assistance. Drunken white men peeling paint, rats, roaches, no combed hair, no unwashed bodies, no bug-eyed babies in my childhood. As an example of white sacrifice, all these down-and-out white people, so-called. Even that's kind of odd, too. You don't have many black people in these social services positions, like welfare-type positions, then it's not too bad. But that is a little like, wow, you're a white sacrifice hurting white person, and you get some Negro coming to say, no, you don't get no food stamps? Like, ew. Let's see. 3. Penkin, short, scraggy white man threatened to fire me if I did not follow that recommendation. Black self-respect. This is the Rosenberg case. 4. The Meerpoles. Abel composed The House I Live In. The more well-known song associated with Abel Meerpole is the song Strange Fruit, which was based on a poem of his. He was inspired by a Lawrence Baitler 1930 photo of the lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith in Marion, Indiana. Jim Jones. The song was made famous by Billie Holiday and was discussed on the C.O.W.S Book Club selection Heart of a Woman by Dr. Maya Angelou. The Meerpoles eventually adopted the orphaned children of the Rosenbergs. 5. Awarding custody to the grandmother, Sophie Rosenberg, the Meerpoles eventually adopted the children and changed their name to Meerpole. How about that? Chapter 4. Black lawyers were so few. No effort to count them was made until 1965. 65,000 law students, 700 were black. Only 10% would pass the bar and enter the profession. The American Bar Association, 2024. First-year law students, 39,689. 3,000 black. Eep. Unless my niggardly math is wrong, that is substantially less than 10%, which would mean it has gone down in the, 50 years? 60 years, excuse me, in the 60 years since she was talking about that. We have not made any progress at all. In fact, we have gone the other way. We have been retarded even further by racists. Continues, 2,099 black female attorneys. Female black first year increased 7.4% in 2023. Black male first year decreases 6.7%. Man, I'm good. Black male privilege. I'm good. Johnny Cochran rolling over in his grave. 2. Page 38. Only day students were eligible for the law review, transferred from night school. She did, Evelyn Williams. After a year, she weighed less than 100 pounds, and she was close to a complete physical breakdown. Second area of people activity, education in the global system of racism, white supremacy. Absolutely. And particular, where I guess now some of that would be so much different because you would have Zoom and they would have a lot more classes offered at different times. And just so much has changed with internet alone. And the fact that now you have lots of classes that are taped, so you could just go and watch the lectures anytime and all the rest of it. So different world in some respects. Some things have changed and some things have gotten worse. Let's see. 3. Criminal trial lawyer Eugene Kinkle Jones, helping other victims as best we can under the circumstances, should be part of our code in the workplace. Mr. Jones is a revered graduate of Cornell University in, I think that's upstate New York. He's also one of the black fraternity, renowned, honored even years after his death in the black fraternities for all of his work, legal work, helping other black people as well. 4. Legal Aid Society, shabby white lawyers and bewildered black people pled guilty. Black people were ignorant of trial practice. Another example of affirmative action for people classified as white. Absolutely. Same thing, they were talking about that with the Dr. Uche Blackstock lecture from a couple of weeks ago, where a white person inadvertently got revealed that you have too many white doctors and probably too many swangos and unqualified white doctors, don't even have correct intentions. Same thing with lawyers. Too many white lawyers, and probably same thing, too many charlatans and unqualified white lawyers. I feel like I should say Marsha Clark right there. Affirmative action? Yeah. 5. Matt Burse, Ohio. I became his consultant. One exclusionary pretrial motion practice. Interesting backstory on this case. Dalree Mapp was a black female in Cleveland, Ohio, who was at various times involved with local racketeers and gangsters such as Don King, who at the time was known as the Numbers King of Cleveland, later becoming the boxing promoter that we know him as today. She died in 2014 at the age of 91, becoming an expert in some unique and important area that is part of our job, can be constructive in the global system of racism, white supremacy, and may help maintain our employment. Always learning. Absolutely. Chapter 5. At the end of my first year, judges no longer directed me to leave the well of the courtroom. I had met the challenge of being black, female, and a criminal trial lawyer. See article about Brian Stevenson, black male civil rights lawyer, no fan of the cows, founder of the EJI Lynching Memorial in Montgomery. We've had listeners dial in and talk about that. And he talks about, because he does a lot of cases, talking about Mr. Stevenson, he does a lot of cases as an attorney, death row, and same thing, privileged black males who've been unjustly incarcerated. And he talks about all the racism that they and he experience in the courtroom. In fact, even think what she said about the individuals, black people, don't have any money coming in, and we, convicted you of a dropsy or narcotics or what have you. These people are despised, and that gets transferred to the lawyers. 2, corporate criminal, white-collar crime. U.S. attorneys cash in expertise and manipulation of evidence, a.k.a. white people crimes. Really, I was thinking master deceivers. Learn all the rules so we can expertly break them and lie and then sound real sophisticated in doing so they think, oh no, he's just brilliant. No, they're lying and criminals the whole way through. Let's see, 3, personal living arrangements. A large, unpretentious apartment, 1 bedroom, convenient to every means of transportation. I suspect Mr. Fuller would applaud this effort. Absolutely. Let's be frugal and not go out just because things are looking okay for the time being, and I'm gonna spend and go get the biggest high rise in Central Park, and let's just save those coins. Race soldiers, cause you get furloughed next month. Save those nickels. 4, we've heard that twice now. We've only been reading this book 2 weeks, already heard it twice. 4, Carson DeWitt Baker, black lawyer, defense of Hewlin Jack, first black Manhattan Borough president. DeWitt Baker died at age 57. As a black male, had a thriving law practice. Apparently, he could command fees of $20,000. That's not even counting for inflation. He worked without a fee on the Jack case. He is quoted as saying, I am emotional about this. He is being taken advantage of because he is a Negro. Mr. Jack was convicted. Emotional on discrimination. Mr. Baker's emotionalism on discrimination against Negroes sometimes flared into courtroom outbursts. He was usually a soft-spoken man who specialized in tax law. New York Times obituary, August 12, 1962. 5, page 45. 1960 to 1965 were an economic roller coaster. Depending on whether my clients paid me, I had a plethora of clients, paucity of funds, and a pyramid of work. Large firms demand entire fees up front. Chair important committees. Pro bono work aren't speaking to black single practitioners or the small black law firms. The types of cases available to black lawyers are limited. Few of us were personal injury specialists. Black victims chose white lawyers. The feast or famine economic condition of Miss Williams being a black lawyer was discussed by Assata Shakur in her autobiography. This text might be a good read for young victims thinking about becoming lawyers. Even though this book was written years ago, I suspect black lawyers still experiencing the same problems, absolutely, especially with the system of white supremacy. 6, numbers runners, dropsy evidence. The deal was that the runner would plead guilty, not willing to be a mouthpiece, my way to economic security, legal expertise to black death peddlers as an example of having a code. I will not harm other victims. I do think that is important as well. And even the work that she was doing on these cases, and some of that, the level of racism is that, and even we've talked, I think a number of y'all have pointed this out before, the police incompetence, racism, and corruption. Like, wow, you all just make this a standard code, grab any privileged black dude that you see out on the street and you want to convict them, put some crime on them. Oh yeah, I saw him, he dropped a brick of cocaine or whatever, he dropped a bloody knife or, whatever, dropped a bloody white woman, whatever. And I saw him do it and we cuffed him in 30 years, boom. And you go like, what? You saw him with the binoculars? What? You work like... Man, come on. And sprinkle the crack on it. Been doing that for 100 years and just locking black people up. And you just go ask questions. Just go and you don't get some old affirmative action lawyer who's going to take the last nickel in your pocket and plead you guilty and take the lamest plea bargain. Like, oh, no. Just ask a few questions. Poke it. Really? Johnny Cochran. What'd you say there, Mark Furman? Where'd you go to school, Martin Furman? You dropped out of school. What now? How many times you said that? Just asking questions. Like, wait a minute. Something about this ain't even, wait a minute. You said, what? And the same thing we heard with Susan Smith. Just asking questions. Some of this don't even seem possible. I mean, I guess Leroy could have done all this, but man, I guess most of the time when white people accuse black people, we don't even ask, well, yeah, Leroy did it. Yeah, Leroy did it. Just ask a question. I mean, even if you don't like Leroy, just ask a question or two just to see. 6. Oh, we got them. Drops in. 7. Give up the private practice, get a job. The Harlem Anti-Poverty Agency, Harry U, 1965, 232 K Central, Harlem. 31% under the age of 21. The juvenile delinquency, narcotics addiction, venereal disease, welfare, housing unit deterioration, and she said it was deliberate deterioration. As of 2010, Central Harlem's population is 118,000. 9.5% white, 63% black, Hispanic, Latino of any race. Now that's 22%, whatever that means. Since 2000, there was a 402% increase in white and an 11% decrease in black. 21% ages 0 to 17. 35% of the people are between ages 25 and 44. The life expectancy is lower. Unemployment rate is higher. Rates of poverty higher than other areas of Manhattan. Not sure how much has changed for the benefit of victims in Central Harlem since 1965. I am sure if they have not been gentrified on out of there, it cannot be any better. It's particularly with COVID, because they were talking about how black people were hit really, really hard during COVID-19, and the economics didn't even recuperate years after, they were at the peak of the shutdowns and distancing and restaurants having to do all those extra precautions and or close down and all the rest of it. So I can't imagine it being any better. 8, I was a technician, inflexible. I needed other qualifications, plans superior to mine because of their very genesis. Conciliator of competing interests. Does she mean the plans were superior because they were submitted by people classified as white? Maybe. It did seem like what she was talking about, that there was a level of, dare I say, cronyism, nepotism, in terms of having to deal with all these politics of different people being involved and what am I going to get for it. And yeah, it did seem like to a degree that it might have been that some of these people had plans that were, they maybe didn't have the correct intentions to help the people who needed the most help. They had plans that were, maybe I can get some glory or hook up my homies who can do some construction or get jobs out of this or, something else. 9, Paul Chavini, 1960, Harvard Law. Only credentials, the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964. Jean Kahn insisted I include Columbia Law School expertise based on an expertise article she and her white husband wrote in 1964's Yale Law Review, The War on Poverty. Their credentials were, I am white, my black sister, basically. So they can maintain tabs on what these slaves are doing on the plantation. Also provides an opportunity for white law school students to pad their resume. See, I'm no racist. I helped my black brothers and sisters in Harlem when I was a student as they scurry off to their big private law firms for jobs or Supreme Court clerkships after graduation. And see, they can add that. They can have a really sparkly resume like, man, I went down there to Mississippi and, them Southern crackers, like, woo-wee, they hate a carpetbagger. And then I came back up here to Harlem. I went over there and helped them niggers. We were getting all kinds of projects. I went down to work with the juvenile reform program. And come on. I marched with Dr. King, lived long enough. I went and hung out on the outskirts for the Million Man March. Had to keep tabs on that no-count scoundrel, Minister Farragon, see. Yeah. Number 10, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. charged corruption. Harry U. under siege. Faltered. Proposal was never implemented. In the end, white supremacists do not allow anything to be implemented that could be potentially bad for their business. Absolutely. I mean, they could have, if they thought this Harry U. program was constructive, they could have just carried that on. They have lots of programs that live well beyond the person who created the program, even after they leave office. Hey, the program we all hate. Obama been gone for what? Almost a decade. We still got that no-count trifling Obamacare hanging around, right? So obviously, it's all kinds of programs. The person who created it, they can die, go to jail, all kinds of things can happen. If the program is constructive, you just continue that on. Get new people to spearhead the effort, refine it, update it, all the rest of it. And even long-running pattern, black elected officials. Now, I'm not, saying to go in and commit crimes. I'm not even saying that these folks didn't do anything incorrect. But what I am saying, the long pattern, black elected officials. Whew, we are coming for you. Jesse Jackson Jr., Kwame Kilpatrick, they were just talking about, they were talking about going to get Kwame Kilpatrick's friends and relatives up in Michigan. He did his time and everything. Ray Nagin down in New Orleans, you can just go and pack him up. The young lady, Marilyn Mosby, attorney in Maryland, she tried to get justice for Frederick. You are a black elected official. Make sure your I's dotted, T's crossed. You want evidence, documentation for everything. Because they're going to accuse me of any and everything. Man, I was trying to think of somebody. I'm sure some other officials, if you gave me more time, that was just a list of folks I could think of off the top of my head. Some of these folks, just because they've been talking about these people. Oh, Letitia James. How I forget Letitia James? That's right now. I could just think of current events. Any other black people that's in office right now, they probably facing charges too. Number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564-943. Pound. Press star 61 if you have commentary. Email untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll pause there on email 1. The rest of it we have not read yet after the second audio. Let's see. Folks who dialed in with a hand up, Lauren should be with us. We'll see if other folks have commentary.
Hello? Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Okay. Great. There was a bit of a struggle there. So I have some thoughts about the reading. At chapter 3, when she said she was a social investigator for the Department of Welfare, and she said she would go on the home visits, and she said, I refused to notice signs of extra income, like a pair of cheap shoes on the feet of small children, or to make the required inspection of the refrigerator that might have revealed an extra dozen eggs or 2 bottles of milk instead of 1. And, I think it's understandable what she did, but I just asked myself, I wonder if if a white woman going to do the inspection of non-white people's houses, if they made those sorts of decisions. If it's required, they're going to be like, well, I have to look in the refrigerator. Let me see. When she was talking about she went to law school and it was very demanding, she said St. John's method for determining eligibility for admission, whether in the day or evening session, was to weigh both the LSAT score and college grades. Continue in the program and ultimately to graduate, you had to place in the top 2/3 each year or be dropped from the school. That does not seem correct to me because think about it. If imagine you have a class where almost everyone does well. Basically, everybody has A's and B's. If you're going to drop the bottom third of the class every year, regardless of how well they perform, I don't know, that doesn't seem correct to me. Just in her participating in the Ethel and Julius Rosenberg case, wow, this lady has been, it's like she's been near so much history. I guess everyone has, but famous history that lots of people know about, and the extent that white people were willing to go to just to punish the offspring of the Rosenbergs. Like, I really need to stop being surprised at how far white people will go. But that lawyer, Emmanuel Block, like, he leaves a trust fund to the children, and then they try to take control of the trust fund. It says within days after it had withdrawn its petition from Children's Court, the state filed a new one in Surrogate's Court asking that the Jewish Child Care Association be appointed as the children's legal guardian, as well as their guardian for administering a trust fund established for them by Block and left to them in his will. And the legal question to be resolved was whether the trust fund was the children's property or Block's. But however that question was decided, the tactic of filing such a joint petition in Surrogate's Court, which administered estates, served the state's primary purpose to remove the resolution of the custody from the Supreme Court and thereby nullify the recommendation I had made to Judge McNally. And it's like white people come up with all these complicated rules. You follow their complicated rules, come to a logical conclusion, but if they disagree with it, they just change the rules. And she said something I thought was important. At the end of chapter 3, she said the Rosenberg case was my first direct experience of the complicity between the judiciary and official government agencies that can result in manipulation of the fairness principle, a danger to which the judicial system is allegedly immune. And it was the first time I was exposed to the way in which lives, especially those that have been the focus of national attention and fall within judicial jurisdiction, can be permanently altered by prejudice and arbitrary decisions. The experience had prepared me, however, to walk through the corridors of justice with open eyes when I became a lawyer. I thought that was really important, and it was a really interesting part of the text so far. I also noted the part about the low numbers of law students, but that's already been talked about. Let me see. Oh, when she talked about that first client that she got the murder charge dismissed, I just, so many things. Like, we're not far into this book, you know, and she was saying, I remember his name to this day, although I've never seen him since except for a few lines in the Amsterdam News. There was no newspaper report of his dismissal, but I keep that short paragraph as the most positive punctuation my first year of practice could have produced. I had proven my ability as a criminal defense trial lawyer. Now I needed to make a living from it. And she seems so admirable to me. It seems like we've had a couple of people like this where we're reading these books, and I just really admire the things they did so much, because what she's describing, it doesn't seem easy. You know, working a full-time job, going to school at night. The year she tried to go to school in the daytime and nighttime, she's hardly eating. She's less than 100 pounds. It just seems like so much to go through just in order to be a lawyer or have a job that's not the regular jobs that white people want you to have, you know, working as a mortician or a barber or at the post office. Not that there's anything wrong with these jobs, but it's like only a couple of jobs we're supposed to have, and when we go outside of that, then it is not, people are not really supportive, especially white people. that Adam Clayton Powell, after all of that, he was charged with the misuse of government funds in 1967 and stripped of his 22 years of seniority, including his chairmanship of the congressional subcommittee that funded and administered the program Hair You. That was just like, after all of that work, it's like it comes to nothing. You're wasting so much time and energy. So I guess at least after this, when her parents call, she's going to be able to go and help them with the real estate stuff in North Carolina. Well, at least she could try. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
For sure. Lauren was one of the folks who thought that the narration was a little fast last week, so we did tweak it and get that turned down a little bit. Was it improved this week or still a little too fast?
I thought it was still kind of fast, but what did you change? If it was at 100%, what did you change it to?
About 4 click. You just click down, so it was about 4 clicks slower.
So 96% of the regular speed?
That probably, yeah, 4 clicks lower.
Okay. Okay. Still seems a little speedy to me, but maybe I'm just slow. I guess we can see what other people say.
Okay. We'll go a little slower. We'll see if folk thinks she's still going a little rapid. Let us know. Did remember though. Much obliged, Lauren. Yeah, I think quite admirable. It definitely does not seem easy, what she is describing, like the law school and all the sacrifice that she had to make, and gets opportunity, and she's taking care of Joey in the midst of all this. So it's nice to have a few extra coins if you are helping out in taking care of a black child. Like, yeah, it definitely does not seem easy, and she's soldiering right on through, and doesn't seem like she's telling her, look, get on out of here, I've got my fill of broke black people, get on out of here, getting me some folks with some money, and like she's hanging in there and trying to make the best of it. So yeah, I would say quite admirable, trying to practice justice, no less. How about that? Let's see. *61. I'll get to a few of my notes before we push off to the second audio installment. Let's see. Some of this, what she's talking about when she's working as a civil service agent, basically child welfare. Like, man, white people do not care about children, like all of it, even the punitive measures. Like, oh, is that an extra egg in the fridge? Oh, I got to write you up for that. Oh yeah, you got some shiftless Negro in here helping out. Like, wow. And I guess she was looking out for white people. What Lauren was saying, would they have the same sort of discretion? So if I'm white and I'm coming and checking a white family, oh, you got an extra gallon of milk. Now, do I report you for that? Or, I see some muddy boots on the back porch. Do I report you for that? Or same way that cronyism and nepotism, I think that was already said today. Let's see. When Evelyn Williams, when she talks about how filthy these white residences were in comparison to her own childhood, where she said there was no uncombed hair, no unwashed bodies, no baggy-eyed babies, that, we were respectable and did all of those things, and we were still victims of white supremacy. James Baldwin wrote really eloquently about that. Race soldiers talking about how black people are filthy and, lazy and don't clean up and all the rest of it. That has nothing to do with this problem at all. And he said you had whole generations of black people who aggressively cleaned and took 15 showers a day and 20 different types of deodorant and snatched their hair and did all this, and you're still a Negro. Let's see. Not that we're against personal hygiene. That's great. Just that does not end racism. Let's see. I too thought it was so vindictive. That would really be another one. White people do not care about children. How vindictive the pursuit seemed to be of the Rosenberg's children. Like, wow. I mean, even that reminded me of Devante to a degree. Like, just wow. I mean, you got the parents and they're going like, we got just wow. I mean, that probably was a great lesson to see early on in her career. Like, wow, this is not necessary. Even when we get to children, this ain't got nothing to do with justice. You know, the Rosenberg's children didn't commit no crime here. So what is all this punitive conduct for? Matter of fact, I just told you, Kwame Kilpatrick, he served his time. They are like right now, 2025. We gonna get your cousins, Kwame. We know they helped you do something. Like, dang, really? Who lynched Emmett Till? Y'all want to go and find some criminals like all these lynchings they got. They want to go and get Kwame Kilpatrick and Ray Nagins. You know, your fifth cousin got some bricks they stole. Let's see. Children need to be with loving relatives. Again, there were so many moments when I read this when I thought of Devante. In fact, the whole passage where she says, to be an important factor in the children's lives if they were permitted to remain with their grandmother. I had seen too many children delivered to the confines of institutional indifference, and I hoped I would be able to support my conviction that they, like all children, should live with loving relatives. But I was careful the investigation had to provide an objective foundation to support my recommendation, and I strove to achieve that. Evidence-based. And, I mean, I hear that said widely. It is always best for children to be with attempted loving relatives as opposed to Devante, where anything can happen to you, and mostly something bad. Rosenberg, like, whew, the vindictiveness. And like I said, there was a lot of points that Devante. The state had not yet relinquished its determination to remove the children from their grandmother's care and institutionalize them. This is another one. I said, Devante. Let's see. Chapter 4. Yeah, it is very admirable, like everything she does to move her schedule around and the folks that she's working with and trying to help black people, just all of it. It is super, even going into court and being sassy and making all these motions like at a time where they don't even have black lawyers. Super admirable. I did catch the date where she says she's talking about Mr. Eugene Kinkle Jones. He has that peculiar name. Where she says, regarded as a genius by white lawyers, he blazed the trail for other black lawyers and had no heroes. That will frequently be the case if you are classified as black and you're trying to do something constructive. You are certainly not going to have a whole lot of people that look like you who have done this before. Frequently, not always, but frequently, because white people allow us to do so few constructive things. They certainly make it difficult. Miss Williams, case in point. Continuing. He was talking about Mr. Eugene Kinkle Jones, that his presence was tall, well-tailored, slender body, narrow-brimmed hat, discouraged familiarity. He was a loner, probably constructive. I was one of the few exceptions. We remained close until he died on October 18, 1973. That's tomorrow. Yikes. See if they have any posts. Like I said, he's well respected, so they'll probably have some posts to acknowledge his birthday, maybe even today, certainly tomorrow. Let's see. Last one I'll share. I thought this case was staggering with this probably black male defendant, where he's going to get serious charges. They're going to hang a murder case on him, and to come on, take the plea and, come on, you did it, Leroy, come on. And she's like, they don't even have no, no, I don't even think you got evidence of a case. No. And they said, well, okay. Well, let's do manslaughter. And then we get all the way down to times that like, whoa, by the time we didn't got all the way down here, she said she was nervous when the black brother said, oh, no, I didn't do it, and I'm not taking no plea, and no. She said she was nervous. Now, by the time we didn't got all the way to, how about time served and jaywalking? Like, wait a minute. No, man. No. Like, I don't think you have evidence even for jaywalking. Like, no. Prove it. Unless you got some hidden evidence someplace else, like, nah, man, we're not taking nothing. And from what we've heard in the book club, at minimum, it's a whole lot of cases like this where, O.J. Simpson, you got nothing but racism and marked GED Furman. That's all you got. And a black Crayola where you can go, we gonna darken juice up. Put that out. Yeah, he did. You know he did it. That's all you got. Well, and if you can't afford Johnny Cochran, you get this, what she said, old shabby white lawyer. Well, you don't want to be Khalif Browder now, do you? We'll get to audio segment 2. If you have thoughts, make a note. We will resume. Evelyn Williams getting back to Wilmington, North Carolina. Inadmissible Evidence. Katherine Massey Book Club, audio segment 2.
Chapter 6. I went to North Carolina reluctantly, not believing I could reverse the legal misfortunes inflicted on my parents by a racist judicial system, corrupt judges, corrupt surveyors, corrupt clerks of court, and corrupt lawyers, all of whom had collaborated with real estate land barons to steal the Freeman Beach lands. After all, exploitation of minorities in this country had a long history and had never been restricted to African American and immigrant labor. It had its genesis in the theft of the land owned by Native Americans. I also hesitated because I had no experience in either real estate transactions or real estate law and was totally ignorant of North Carolina practice. But all of these legitimate considerations vanished when I realized the enormity of the business and legal fraud that had denied the Freeman heirs their rightful ownership of Freeman's Beach. And I ended up spending most of the next year and a half in North Carolina trying to undo the wrong. Each year, from as early in my life as I can remember, my parents had made the southern pilgrimage to Wilmington, North Carolina, and a major part of our holiday had been spent at Freeman's Beach and Seabreeze, home of the Freeman clan. In addition to crabbing, oyster, and clam gathering, and fishing in the waters of Myrtle Grove Sound, the eastern border of the Freeman's mainland property, we spent time at Freeman's Beach. To reach it, we had to drive through segregated Carolina Beach. Black people were not permitted to swim in the ocean fronting Carolina Beach, and with the exception of the Freeman family, whom the whites called Indians and whose ownership of the beach north of Carolina Beach was grudgingly admitted, were not even permitted to drive on the only road leading to Freeman's Beach. We would park on the silky white sand, and I remember how proud I felt as I gazed at our beach. As far as I could see, the last remaining large expanse of beach property owned by African Americans in the United States, and listened to my parents' plan to someday develop it for black people. The land had been in my mother's family since 1876, when Robert Bruce Freeman, my mother's father, purchased 2,800 acres, some of it on the beach and some on the adjacent mainland. His entire family, 6 children and their families from his first marriage and 5 from his second, lived on 400 acres of the mainland property, which he called the Freeman Homestead. My grandfather had purchased the property for personal, philanthropic, and investment purposes. He gave the state of North Carolina 1 acre for a public school, and he gave acreage to St. Stephen's Church and the local African Methodist Episcopal churches. He also leased the rights to some of the land for timber cutting and gravel and clay excavating. He bequeathed to the children from his first marriage the 57-acre plot of land on which each of them had lived during his lifetime, and the same acreage to his second wife, my mother's mother. The remainder of the property was divided equally among all his children from both marriages. After his death in 1902, my mother's brothers and sisters continued to live on the homestead, reaping the profits from the timber, clay, and gravel leasing on their other mainland properties and basically ignoring the beach property. At the time, it held neither monetary nor practical value for them. As a result, when Ellis Freeman, my grandfather's oldest son and the executor of his will, legally partitioned the homestead tract in 1914, he never divided the beachlands described in Grant 97 issued in 1776 by the state of North Carolina. On June 12, 1940, Ellis orchestrated the sale of the beach, but it was not until 2 decades later, after I had analyzed many court documents, that I realized that he in cahoots with a real estate developer, had fraudulently extracted his siblings' consent with the exception of my mother and 4 others to sell the land, and had misrepresented the amount of property conveyed. The effect of the deed was to extend the boundaries of Carolina Beach north for 3,500 feet into Freeman's Beach, and immediately after the sale to Home Real Estate Realty Company in 1940, summer homes, small hotels, and condominiums sprang up along this previously undeveloped land. As a result, when Ellis Freeman, my grandfather's oldest son and the executor of his will, legally partitioned the homestead tract in 1914, he never divided the beachlands described in Grant 97 issued in 1776 by the state of North Carolina. On June 12, 1940, Ellis orchestrated the sale of the beach, but it was not until 2 decades later, after I had analyzed many court documents, that I realized that he in cahoots with a real estate developer, had fraudulently extracted his siblings' consent with the exception of my mother and 4 others to sell the land, and had misrepresented the amount of property conveyed. The effect of the deed was to extend the boundaries of Carolina Beach north for 3,500 feet into Freeman's Beach, and immediately after the sale to Home Real Estate Realty Company in 1940, summer homes, small hotels, and condominiums sprang up along this previously undeveloped land. During the next 6 years, it became necessary to hire and fire 3 different Wilmington lawyers because they refused to tangle with the real estate interests on whom their own practices depended. But in 1951, despite the fact that the litigation was still unresolved, my parents sold their house and business in Queens, New York, and returned to Wilmington to pursue my father's dream of building a business on the beach. When my father applied for a building permit, it was denied because he was told he had no proof that the portion of the beach on which he wanted to build belonged to the Freeman heirs. He realized then that Grant 97, a document he had never seen, would have to be located and surveyed. His new lawyers refused to research the court records for the grant, and he discovered it only through the painstaking efforts of Thomas Gervais, publisher of the African American weekly newspaper his father had founded, and brother of Willie Gervais, who had been best man at my father's wedding. He then brought the grant to John Ford, a North Carolina historian and land surveyor, who certified that the land in Grant 97 was indeed Freeman heir property and also extended into the portion being fraudulently sold by Home Real Estate and its 1947 grantee, Resort Development Company. Once he showed the officials the grant and Ford's map, he was issued the building permit. The building was completed on July 4, 1951. My parents proclaimed that day Robert Bruce Freeman Day and celebrated it for many years afterward. The building was large, even grandiose compared with many of the Carolina beach structures, and was situated 3,000 feet from the ocean, its white cement facade gleaming above the dunes. There was a dining area which doubled as a dance floor at night, a long counter for takeout orders, a locker room, bathrooms, shower rooms, and 2 bedrooms in the back for the family. A local muralist painted the entire interior with brightly colored seascapes, and my father built a hard red clay road from 17th Avenue to the parking lot adjacent to the building claimed by the town of Carolina Beach to be its northern boundary. My mother, with help from workers in Wilmington, kept the restaurant as spotlessly clean as she did her own house, and her clam fritters were as famous as McDonald's hamburgers are now. Black people came to the beach from all over the country, and my parents were instantly successful. Surprisingly, many whites vacationing in Carolina Beach also frequented the restaurant and danced without incident both in the building and on the pavilion my father had built a short distance into the ocean. Now determined more than ever not only to establish the specific boundaries of the parcel surrounding the restaurant, to expand the development of the beach, and to sell oceanfront property to black people, but also to have a court determination of the actual location of the boundaries of Grant 97. My parents reactivated their dormant legal action. In April 1953, they retained John Bright Hill, another white real estate lawyer from Wilmington, and he engineered the disaster that inflicted injuries from which they would never recover. Hill's first treacherous act was to bring a new action for partition, this time allegedly for a division of all the land described in Grant 97, but intentionally misrepresenting the description by setting forth as the grant's entire acreage only its southern half, where Resort Development Company was illegally building. He omitted the northern half of Grant 97 that Resort's predecessors had actually purchased from the other Freeman heirs. Resort denied that it was a tenant in common with the Freeman heirs and claimed sole ownership of the land described in Hill's petition. And indeed, it was not a tenant in common. Resort owned no property at all in the southern half of the grant. But my parents, relying on their lawyer and unaware of the trickery of conveyance nomenclature, did not recognize Hill's malevolent conversion and waited with great anticipation for the case to reach the trial calendar. In the meantime, in August 1954, Hurricane Hazel, one of the most destructive hurricanes to hit the eastern coast of the United States in over a century, ripped across the Carolinas, leveling property from Cape Hatteras to Myrtle Beach, but aimed primarily at Carolina Beach. The morning after the hurricane passed, my parents rushed to the beach to assess the damage and saw nothing except smooth sand still being washed over by the ocean where their building had stood the day before. My fatalistic mother's reaction was stoic, and she directed her energies to the care of my father, who collapsed and was bedridden for several weeks. The loss was compounded by their having been unable to obtain a bank loan to build, and so a large part of their savings was washed away with their business. Nor did their insurance cover water and wind damage. Nevertheless, my father rebuilt, pulling concrete block after concrete block from the sand where the remnants of the demolished building lay. Having learned about the force of hurricanes, he positioned the new structure farther back from the ocean and purchased insurance for wind and water damage from the only company that offered it, Lloyd's of London. But the new building, too, was flattened when Hurricane Connie stormed ashore in August 1955. Again, my father rebuilt, and my parents reopened their business as they waited for their case to be tried. It was not until 1956, when they pressed Hill to explain the delay in bringing the case to trial, that they learned that the case had been stricken from the trial calendar on October 30th, 1955. When it was eventually restored, on October 20th, 1956, Judge Clifton L. Moore stated that he had inadvertently removed the case from the calendar because the original papers could not be found and were not before the court. Hill denied having any prior knowledge of Moore's action, and Lois Ward, the clerk of court in charge of civil trial scheduling and responsible for all pleadings filed in the court, had no excuse for the error. She was, however, to continue to play a major role in the catastrophes that followed. I had finished law school and was studying for the bar examination when my parents called to tell me that their case had finally been scheduled for trial on February 18, 1957. I flew to Wilmington, and after reading the petition, Resort's answer, the description of the 1940 deed, and the grant, I recognized Hill's betrayal. I begged them to withdraw the case from the calendar and retain a new lawyer from outside of Wilmington who would represent them honestly. I knew that their case would be summarily dismissed once proof was offered that there was no joint ownership of the lands they sought to divide. My mother agreed with me and joined my efforts to dissuade my father from proceeding further. But the trial was only a few days away, and his impatience to begin the development of the beach blinded him to the obvious obstacle to its realization. He stubbornly refused to accept my opinion, and for the first time I questioned my father's judgment. But then again, it was the first time that his judgment was impaired by denial. The one-day trial was held before Judge Malcolm Paul. Ford testified that he had located the boundaries of Grant 97, testified to its location as reflected on the map that he had introduced into evidence, but admitted that he had not physically surveyed the land, a fatal omission in establishing boundaries. My parents could not have been expected to know that they needed a surveyor's appraisal, but Hill, a leading real estate lawyer, obviously did. Clearly, he had not asked Ford to conduct the physical survey in preparation for the trial to ensure the defeat of my parents' action. Every day for the next 5 months, my father, no longer willing to rely on Hill, went to the courthouse and asked Lois Ward whether or not a decision had been rendered, and every day she told him no. I made my annual visit to Wilmington on the 4th of July, and on July 9th, went to the court and searched the judgment roll, the public document on which decisions are recorded, only to discover that Moore's judgment had been entered that day. It stated, "The petitioners, my parents, having failed to show that they have good record title to the lands described in the petition or any part thereof, are not entitled to recover the lands described in the petition or any part thereof." Taylor appealed the decision to the Superior Court in Wilmington, and during the hearing held before Judge Moore, Ward testified that she could not satisfactorily explain the time lapse between the signing of the judgment and its entry into the judgment roll. She also admitted that she had lied to my father about the status of his case. My father, in turn, testified that his lawyer, Hill, had never advised him that the judgment had been signed. But Moore responded that that didn't matter because my father had a lawyer from whom he could have obtained the information. Taylor's last witness, Dwight McEwen, the court reporter during the trial who had been present in Judge Paul's courtroom on June 18th, put the final piece into place. He testified that Hill had prepared the judgment and, together with Resort's lawyer, had presented it to Paul, who, after signing it, directed him to write into the minute book the fact that both attorneys had written on a carbon copy of the judgment that it was satisfactory. Paul had further directed that in the event my parents appealed, the carbon copy was to become a substitute for the original, filed judgment, which neither attorney had written his approval. Paul's intentions were clear, to reflect the fact that my parents' lawyer had prepared the judgment and had knowledge of the date on which it had been signed, thereby imputing this information to them and binding them to it. Taylor appealed Moore's decision, but the Supreme Court of North Carolina refused to accept the case for review. 2 years later, on March 5, 1959, Resort pursued its advantage and brought an action to evict my parents from their business on the beach, citing Paul's judgment. Taylor answered the eviction petition, and Joseph Parker, Superior Court judge, conducted the hearing. He ruled against my parents, stating that while Judge Paul's judgment did not specifically pass title to Resort, he did find that my parents were not entitled to recover the lands described in the petition nor any part thereof. That the judgment operated as a legal prohibition against any claim my parents had in relation to that property. And that, since they had not appealed Judge Paul's judgment, they cannot now impeach it. He gave them 10 days to vacate the property or be removed by the sheriff, and they were ordered to pay all of Resort's costs. Taylor leaped at the new opportunity to attack Paul's judgment, and had he not been my parents' attorney, I hesitate to predict how either of them would have responded. He appealed to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, which reversed Parker's decision, ruling that while Paul had decreed that my parents did not own the southern half of Grant 97, he had not determined that Resort was the owner. Resort therefore had no legal right to evict my parents. A year later, on August 15, 1960, Resort tried to evict my parents again, this time demanding that the court grant the development company a writ of possession, claiming Paul's judgment as the basis for its suit. The doctrine of res judicata, based on the Supreme Court determination, could have been interposed to defeat Resort's complaint, but Taylor seized the opportunity to reopen the issue of the ownership of Grant 97, asserting that the land on which my parents' building was located was within the grant. Simultaneously, my parents hired Robert McHenry and Jared Greer, highly qualified surveyors from Leakesville, North Carolina, to physically survey Grant 97 and to testify in court. My father walked every mile of the land with them, and their physical survey established, as had Ford's projection, that the southern boundary of the grant was in Carolina Beach. On May 31, 1961, the trial began before the same judge who had ruled against my parents in 1957, Judge Malcolm Paul. After one day of testimony presented by Resort, Paul's guilt about his past actions in the case surfaced. He forced Resort to enter into a consent order signed by both attorneys and my parents, directing Resort to begin a new action by December 1, 1961, in which it would set out and seek to establish its title to all lands claimed by it in Federal Point Township, where Carolina Beach was located, or to establish the boundaries to the lands claimed by it. Further, my parents would set forth their own claims to the land. The consent order swept the slate clean, nullifying all past judgments and giving my parents another opportunity to have the court determine the boundaries of Grant 97 and to discredit Resort's claim that it owned the southern half of the grant. It was a rare victory, but one that my parents were unable to take advantage of. On May 1, 1962, Resort filed a complaint demanding that the court determine that it was the sole owner of 2 tracts of beach land extending north from Carolina Beach and terminating just short of the southern boundary of the 1940 deed, declaring that the land thus described was entirely without Grant 97. In this action, Resort also claimed to own the property by adverse possession, while Taylor denied Resort's ownership and maintained that both tracts were within the boundaries of Grant 97. He mistakenly alleged that Resort was a tenant in common with the Freeman heirs in all of Grant 97 and failed to state that the Freeman heirs were the sole owners of the property Resort described. My only explanation for the error was that, unknown to my parents, Taylor was at the same time defending his license to practice law against the North Carolina Bar Association's charges of misconduct in previous cases, a common device used to discredit lawyers who vigilantly represent unpopular causes. And the focus of his attention was diverted. He was disbarred in 1963, and I have no doubt that the charges were manufactured in direct response to his efforts on my parents' behalf. Samuel Mitchell, his partner, continued to represent my parents in his absence. In August 1962, Hurricane Diane struck Carolina Beach, ripping the building from its foundations as effectively as if it had been Resort's accomplice. This time, burdened with legal expenses, threatened by future court actions, and unwilling to again make the major investment needed to rebuild, my parents took the Lloyd's of London insurance money and opened a restaurant specializing in my mother's famous seafood cuisine on Red Cross Street in Wilmington. It was the beginning of the Vietnam War, and black soldiers stationed at nearby Fort Bragg crowded the restaurant. They also flocked to an adjacent building in which my parents had created a recreation center for teenagers during the week and a dance hall for the soldiers on weekends. Business thrived until 1967, when the South's implementation of desegregation laws began, and the soldiers, as well as other Wilmington residents, integrated their money into the cash registers of white establishments. The resultant dwindling business forced my parents to close the restaurant. There had been no hurricane for 5 years, and my father applied for a permit to conduct a business on the beach. Not only was it denied, but this time the town of Carolina Beach declared that the beach had been condemned because of high tides and erosion. He was told that no buildings could be constructed on the beach, despite the fact that 2 condominiums had been erected adjacent to where the original buildings had been. The town even denied him a permit to sell refreshments from a portable stand. Samuel Mitchell had replaced Taylor as my parents' attorney until 1966, when he failed to appear at several pretrial hearings scheduled by Resort to take depositions from 4 witnesses that it planned to call at the trial. In January and February of that year, Mitchell had also failed to appear for 2 successive court hearings. Anticipating another betrayal, my parents became so frightened and desperate that they asked me to come to Wilmington. At first, I believed I could be most helpful in obtaining counsel to replace Mitchell, but when I examined the file he released to me, I was appalled to learn that the foundation of our case, establishing Grant 97E's chain of title, had not been researched. Nor had a title search been conducted of each deed from which Resort now claimed its title. I realized we were not ready for trial and persuaded Robert Bond to ask the court that I be allowed to practice in North Carolina for this one case. I also requested that Bond be my co-counsel. He agreed, provided I did all the research, and I plunged into the archives in the basement of the courthouse, grateful for every day of research afforded me by Resort's reluctance to move the case forward on the trial calendar. For obvious reasons, the task of establishing the chains of title of both Resort and Grant 97 could not be referred to a North Carolina title search company. I could rely only on myself to prove our title and disprove Resort's. After 7 months of daily examination of ancient maps and fading handwritten deeds bound in heavy tomes that I had to lift from the shelves on which they had been stored, I uncovered and traced the chains of title for Grant 97. Using my research as a basis, I made a motion to amend Taylor's answer to delete the cross-claim in which he alleged the Freeman heirs were tenants in common with Resort and to substitute the allegation that the Freeman heirs were the sole owners of the land Resort claimed. The motion was denied, and I took exception to each ruling to preserve the error on appeal. In the meantime, I contacted McHenry and Greer, who had surveyed Grant 97 in 1960, to alert them that I felt the case would soon reach the trial calendar and to arrange a meeting with them to discuss their testimony. They told me, without apology, that they would not testify in our behalf, and a further search for North Carolina surveyors who were willing to take on the job was fruitless. Through my friend Doe's association with surveyors in Richmond, Virginia, we retained the firm of Foster and Miller, who qualified in North Carolina, to conduct a physical and aerial survey of Grant 97 in 1966. After the restaurant closed in 1967, with no money coming in and my parents' savings depleted, my father took the only job available to him, supervisor of the bell captains at the Blockade Runner, a large hotel in Wrightsville Beach, a few miles north of Carolina Beach. Nor were my parents able to continue giving me the small amount I required for my rent in New York. But satisfied that I was ready for trial, I obtained a job as a supervisor in the Graduate Vista Volunteers in Service to America program at New York University Law School in January 1968. I researched North Carolina law at the New York County Lawyers Association and was able to fly to North Carolina as I was needed. I was fortunate that spring breaks, holidays, and summer vacations at NYU allowed me to hold a job and continue to work out my parents' legal problems. On September 18, 1968, the case was scheduled for trial before William T. Bundy. On his own motion, the judge removed it from the trial calendar and ordered a compulsory reference, stating that because of the complicated boundary dispute, a referee should decide all of the issues involved. He directed both parties to split the referee's initial costs of $400. Bond and I appealed the order, arguing that the compulsory reference deprived poor people of the constitutional right to pursue their legal claims because they incurred litigation costs they could not afford, and that it also denied the right to a jury trial. The Court of Appeals affirmed Bundy's order, stating that neither of our claims had merit and required no consideration. When the case was returned to Leon Corbett, he appointed a Wilmington surveyor, Henry Von Osen, to survey both contentions and plot them on a map to be used by the referee during his hearing. Von Osen refused to survey Grant 97, claiming that he could not locate the boundaries, despite the fact that Miller, our surveyor, had shown him his own map resulting from his physical survey. We brought a motion to have Von Osen removed as the court surveyor, which Corbett denied. The hearing was held on March 17, 1969, in a small conference room in the courthouse. Resort tried to prove its ownership by claiming title through a 1858 grant issued to James Atkins by the state of North Carolina. That grant was clearly south of Grant 97 as well as the property on which Resort had been building. Von Osen testified that although he did not survey the Atkins grant, he had enough information to plot its location on the court survey map and offered no explanation for his inability to similarly plot Grant 97. Our surveyor and the aerial photographer testified for us, and strangely enough, Resort's lawyer did not cross-examine either of them, but routinely objected to every one of my questions, and Corbett routinely sustained the objections. Additionally, the transcript of the hearing omitted substantial rulings made by Corbett, as well as my objections to them, information that would have been necessary for an appeal. Before he rendered his decision, Corbett required payment of another $2,000. His judgment, filed on June 30th, 1969, concluded that despite the fact that the beginning corner of the Atkins grant cannot be located on the ground, Resort had shown title and possession to the lands it claimed, and that my parents had failed to show title to the lands described in their answer. Bond and I filed a list of written objections and demanded a jury trial, which was heard by Judge Albert W. Cowper on February 9, 1970. The only similarity to a jury trial was the choosing of a jury of 6. No oral testimony was given by the witnesses. The only evidence presented to the jury was the truncated, defective transcript of the hearing, which was read to them by the court reporter and on which they were supposed to render a verdict. But after one day, Cowper relieved the jury of even this responsibility. He dismissed them and rendered a verdict in favor of Resort. His judgment stated that Resort owned the property described in their complaint, that they were not within the boundaries of Grant 97, and that defendants have no right, title, or interest in the lands described. Soon after the decision, Robert Bond died of a heart attack, and we retained the law firm of Pearson, Malone, Johnson, and DeJarman to file an appeal. The Intermediary Appellate Court, the Court of Appeals, affirmed Cowper's judgment, and we pursued the appeal to the highest court, the Supreme Court of North Carolina, which rendered its decision on February 10, 1971. To our objection that we had been denied a jury trial, the court said, "A compulsory reference does not deprive either party of his constitutional right to a jury trial of the issues of fact arising on the pleadings, but such trial is only upon the written evidence taken before the referee." Only one of the 3 judges, Sharp, concurred with the majority opinion but dissented on the issue of a jury trial, stating that the credibility of the witnesses and the weight of the evidence is for determination by the jury. The court upheld the lower appellate court's ruling that we had no interest in the lands claimed by Resort, but reversed the finding that Resort owned any of the land it had described in its complaint. While we were mildly comforted by the court's decision that Resort owned none of the land it claimed, it was of small solace because we were bound by the decision that we did not own the southern half of Grant 97. Unless we were able to achieve a reversal from the U.S. Supreme Court. Because I had never argued a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, I retained a New York law firm with extensive experience in the court to file a writ of certiorari requesting the court's permission to appeal. Shortly thereafter, one of the law partners apologetically advised me that he had failed to file the writ within 10 days following the North Carolina decision, and that his motion for an extension of time had been denied by the Chief Justice. I was heartbroken, but my parents accepted the news without blaming me, reassuring me over and over that I had done everything I could. But the bitterness of this Southern brand of American justice never left them and remained with me as I later confronted it in the North.
Cranberry, New Jersey style racism. Katherine Massey Book Club. If memory serves, and I could be in error, if my memory is correct, Andrew Carl mixed this being the theft of Evelyn Williams, Assata Shakur's ancestors' land, waterfront land, a central component of his book, The Land Was Ours, where he talks about specifically the theft of black waterfront property all across the U.S. And they do lots of things like what you heard. And then we got lots of the Voltron effect, where white people work together to rob all the Negroes. Sometimes they get the police to come and harass the business, and you all are fighting and shooting dice and drinking and selling crack cocaine, and we got to cut your liquor license, so we harass all your customers. You can't have no business if you come and give everybody parking tickets and take them to jail and all that. People don't want to come to your business, so they got all of these. That's what the whole book is about, and I think he makes Assata Shakur and her family, Evelyn Williams, they are a central component. And he talks about how this is not no one-off thing. This is, standard operating procedure, not just theft of black property, but theft of black waterfront property worth lots of money. Well, I don't know. Depending on you got the so-called climate change. Now, they said, you heard it there, they would say, no, you Negroes can't have a permit because we got sea level rise and sea level erosion, which now 2025 probably is true for a lot of areas. So I don't know. Maybe it's valuable. Maybe it's in danger of being submerged or having more intense hurricanes. You heard that too. They were talking about all the different hurricanes and such. They say that's another product of climate change, having more hurricanes and more intense hurricanes. So yeah, we have to check and see what is the weather like around those parts, and what is the projection for like the next, 100 years. Do they think by the year 2100 it's going to be underwater, Wilmington? What do they think? We'll have to see. Number to dial, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Do not wait till the last minute. If you have thoughts, observations, the email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. The remainder of email number 1 did not get to finish because we didn't get that far at that point. He picks up with chapter 6. Went to North Carolina. Misfortunes inflicted on my parents. Racist judicial system. Corrupt judges, corrupt surveyors, corrupt lawyers, all of whom had collaborators with real estate land barons to steal the Freeman Beach lands. Excellent example. What did I say? The Voltron effect in the global system of white supremacy, racism. The stealing of beachfront property from black people has been a frequent area of study on the cows. Absolutely. 2. As far as I could see, the last remaining expanse of beach property owned by African Americans in the United States. What does ownership mean for non-white people in the global system of racism, white supremacy? Fuller talked about this. You can, any of us, we can talk about it. Now, hey, white people can show you better than I can tell you. Whole lot of folks say that they own a house or what have you right now, wink wink, in the midst of this shutdown. Really? Be that notwithstanding. Fuller talked about that though, in terms of owning. How do you, as a victim of racism, how do you, even your life? Hey, what they show you in the book, even your child's life. The Rosenbergs aren't black, but I'm just saying, Devontae, I'm just saying. Hey, and we're going to get to that. Assata, we're going to get to that. So just put a pin in that. We're going to get to that. You don't own your life. You don't own your offspring's life. So a house, your car? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Any hoodles. 4. Ellis Freeman, my grandfather's oldest son, he, in cahoots with a real estate developer, had fraudulently extracted his siblings' consent regardless of his involvement. The racist white supremacists were on a mission to get that land. The racist white supremacists had ample opportunity to reverse what he had done, for sure. And in fact, we talked about that specifically too. They had a whole segment on New York Public Radio, and I highlighted it because they, again, black people are ignorant. We're ignorant about the place where we live. And they said that it's so easy. They said that banks and white real estate investors and all the rest of it, that they are so smart. All they have to do is come and get one person They'll say if you have property and it's divided up or what have you, it's left with, 3 relatives or 8 relatives or 10. The more the better. So all you got to get is 1. And get over on them and come and say something slick to them, or you do the carrot. Hey, black brother, you need a few nickels, because it's easy to find who is the most desperate of the group, who is the least informed of the group, whatever. It's easy to go find whatever victim. I was thinking Mark, but it'd be better than whatever victim, gullible, and bam, just go get them and say whatever you need. If you need to pressure them and you got bad credit, we're going to take this whole problem, or whatever you need to say to them, but get them to go along with your plan, sign whatever you need to sign, and bang. We talked about that too. Andrew Carl, because it's whole books and projects and everything written about this, because white people have. In fact, N.D.B. Connolly, he came here to the University of Washington this year, springtime. He told us, in fact, I'm going to give it to you generationally. He told us in 2015, he told us about Andrew Carl's work, The Land Was Ours, Stealing Beachfront Property from Black People. He told us about his book, A World More Concrete, Racism in Real Estate. And he told us about Tulsa, similar to Wilmington, 1898, Rosewood, on and on and on and on and on. But he said one of the things that they don't talk about when you have these events, the theft of black property. Yes, you can kill all these Negroes, maybe sodomize and rape all of them, paint them white too. But when you kick them out of town, they did have property, raggedy it may be. You can go and get any valuables there, and then, hey, now you got new land. You take all that. Maybe they left so fast, trying to get out with their life. They don't have a deed. They call it fire sale. You get the whole property for free. Or sometimes they say that the Negroes, you ran them off, so they don't pay the property taxes, and they go into rearage. So they say, hey, I just come down and pay off the property taxes. In some places, that's all you have to do. They haven't paid property taxes in 2-3 years. You come and pay off the property taxes, it's yours. And they would do so, all kinds of shenanigans. But at the end of the day, you run off the Negroes, and then you can come take all this property, all of that lost wealth, where you have so many generations of black people. Everything is like starting from zero. You don't get a house. You don't get anything. You don't even get a shirt. Nothing. Your grandmother's blanket that she knit. Nothing. All of that is lost. And you just start from scratch. That has been lots and lots of that. Deliberately so. Let's see. The 5. Unfortunately, the one black lawyer in Wilmington was not willing to accept the case. His New York lawyers refused to research court records. Painstaking efforts by Thomas Jervey, publisher of the African American newspaper, his father found the deed. The importance of black journalism historically has often been discussed on the cows, for sure. And even that, the one black lawyer who would not take the case, what are the consequences for you? And that's why, again, I said 1898 purge. Now, they went after Alex Manley, black journalist and all that. I'm going to be a black black person, period, in this town. I'm going to get uppity with white people. You know what we did before, don't you? You forgot? Let us remind you. No, black brother. No, I can't take this one. No, we got a nice little practice here, and I don't want no trouble with white people. You militant Negroes, get on away from around here. Let's see. 6, Hurricane Hazel, my father rebuilt. Hurricane Connie, 1955. Again, father rebuilt. I see where she gets her tenacity from. Talk about it. Now, again, I was thinking too, wow, what is that area like now? Fast forward 75 years, would it be that easy to just up and rebuild now, or, oof. But that is something remarkable in spite of all of that. I'm sure the insurance companies were no less helpful back then. Difficult for a black person to even get insurance back then. 7, Herman Taylor and Samuel Mitchell, black law partners in Raleigh, North Carolina. Taylor mistakenly alleged that the resorts was a tenant in common, failed to state that Freeman heirs were the sole property owners. My only explanation for the error, defending his license to practice law in North Carolina. Charges were manufactured, his efforts on my parents' behalf. Was it a mistake, or was he threatened? And was he trying to keep from being disbarred if he made the case go away for the racist white supremacists? Again, that's why I said 1898, man. am I going to be a sass-mouthed nigger to these white people and tell them, you don't own this property. You all pulled some shenanigans with the Freeman Bee. You didn't do right, with Miss Williams' family members. That you didn't do right by them black people. Really? Really? They come and burn down, and this is like before, what is she talking, like 1950s going into 1960s? This is like before Dr. King has been assassinated and such. Some of this is before, before Mississippi Freedom Summer that they just talked about in 1964, where they killed those 2 white boys and James Chaney. Like, man, I don't know. I'm going to tell you this. You put me in North Carolina, 1955, 1960. That's even before they had the sit-ins and such at the Woolworth in North Carolina. I don't know, man. They have a lot of guns. Like, I don't know, man. Ooh, they just ran off all the Negroes. How mouthy you going to be? How mouthy you want to be in North? Robert F. Williams had to flee North Carolina, man. How mouthy you want to get in North Carolina? Even now, really, Lennon Lacey. How mouthy you want to get in North Carolina? Let's see. A supervisor of Bell Captains at the blockade runner in Wrightsville Beach. I visited Wrightsville Beach several years ago, and I took a guided tour of Wilmington, North Carolina as a side trip. This is before I started listening to the cows, and I was completely ignorant of the history of the area. See that it's relevant. Most of the people on the tour were classified as white. I had the feeling that suspected racist tour guide was staring at me. He probably was. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be off drinking Mad Dog. Yes, paying attention, doing something constructive. You seeking reparations? Anyway, he never mentioned the Wilmington massacre. If I had been more informed, I might have had a swell fellow moment like Mr. Vincent Woodard had on his tour of the plantation in Delectable Negro. He starts asking all the questions, because they were saying, weren't the black people were fed. They ate so well. They were just plump and fat and just ate mint juleps and pie and cobbler all day long, had big fat bellies and everything. He said, whoa, wait a minute, you lying, ain't you? You didn't have no plump like that. He disrupted the whole tour. 9. Retained a New York law firm. One of the law partners apologetically advised me that he failed to write the writ within 10 days. Of fitting into this tale, I know for sure that I do not understand all the legal machinations in this story, me either. But suffice it to say, the racist white supremacists are the master deceivers. C. Carolina Beach leaders want to buy Freeman Park for $7 million. How will they pay for it? Wilmington Star News on the line. Emma Dill. This is from 2022. Carolina Beach condo complex is bankrupt. $3.95 million. Carolina Beach is talking to the Freeman family about erecting a monument recognizing their contributions. Is this what you call reparations? Like, all of that is so tacky. Like, just all of it. We go through all this and we want to put a monument up after the property is bankrupt, and it does not get any better than tacky. Shout to Fort Bragg too. Let's see. Much obliged for the email, because that is as far as we got for this week. So we'll pick up there the rest of it for next week. Folks who dialed in, or other folks who emailed, *61 on the phone line. Folks who email untiljustice@gmail.com. See if we have other emails. I'll get in some of my notes as well. Let's see. See if Lauren has any comments on the second audio segment, and or any of the other folks who are with us, if they have thoughts on Chapter 6 and all of her Carolina travails in the legal system. Let's see. I am glad they changed it back to Fort Bragg. I forgot even what the tacky name was for. It was for like 30 seconds. They were like, oh no, we're not going to do Fort Bragg because I think that's some slave-owning race soldiers. Oh, no. We're not going to do Fort Bragg. We're going to make it something cool and woke. I don't even, it might have been Fort Woke or whatever it was, but it was for like 30 seconds, and then
President Trump got it. Change it back. That's why I said keep everything the same. Till we replace white supremacy, we just don't change nothing. Just make sure that everybody is aware. Who is this Bragg fellow? Oh, it's another race. So, okay. Got it. Gotcha. So that we all are in the know. Let's see. Lauren should be with us. She'll have commentary. We'll see if other folks have thoughts on Chapter 6.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. It took me a little while to get my comments together. That last segment was kind of confusing. And I was just trying to follow along with all the dates and the hurricanes and stuff like that. But okay. So they get John Ford, a North Carolina historian and land surveyor. He certifies that the land in Grant 97 was indeed Freeman heir property and also extended into the portion being fraudulently sold by Home Real Estate and its 1947 grantee Resort Development Company. Once he showed the officials the Grant and Ford's map, he was issued the building permit. That her dad is issued the building permit, okay? But then they get this white lawyer, Hill, okay? And Hill, man, it just seems like a lot of betrayal, but it seems like one of the big things is on the day of the trial that she told him not to go to. They should not go to trial and get a new lawyer, but the dad goes to trial with Hill. And during this one-day trial, Judge Malcolm Paul is the judge. He testified that he had located the boundaries of Grant 97, but admitted that he hadn't physically surveyed the property. Now, Miss Williams' parents didn't know that needed to happen, that the property needed to be physically surveyed, but the white lawyer knew. He hadn't asked Ford to do the physical survey to ensure her parents lost in court, and that is just, I was going to say terrible, but it's racist. And then, so he goes to, they don't exactly lose in court, right? It's like the judge doesn't even give the action, say what it's going to be, what the result is going to be, right? So now the dad is going up to the courthouse every day trying to figure out what's going on. And this lady, Lois Ward, is telling him no decision has been made. She's saying this every day for 5 months. Now, Miss Williams, she gets there on the 4th, and, on July 9th, she searches the judgment roll and sees that Judge Moore's judgment had been rendered that day, okay? And then they get a new lawyer. This is I think he's black, Taylor. They try to appeal, but white people at the court say the judgment, they can't do that because the judgment was on June 18th and not on July the 9th, and it's been more than 10 days. So that was just some super slick, I don't want to use profanity, tactics by the white people. So, and then when they go to court and lose again, hold on, let me see. There's just so many hurricanes, too, like August 1954, Hurricane Hazel, August 1955, Hurricane Connie, August 1962, Hurricane Diane. Okay. Give me a second. He ruled against my parents, stating that while Judge Paul's judgment did not specifically pass title to resort, he did find that my parents were not entitled to recover the lands described in the petition, nor any part thereof. That the judgment had operated as a legal prohibition against any claim my parents had in relation to that property, and that since they had not appealed Judge Paul's judgment, they cannot now impeach it. They wouldn't let him appeal. And then they were ordered to pay all of Resort's costs. Like, how you gonna ask these two black people to pay the cost for this big company? That's just a lot. I don't know. And then there was a part in there where they were talking about all the people together, and I'm trying to remember how she said it, but it was basically like they were at the hotel and they did this. People were having a good time, eating, getting on the dance floor, and there was white people coming. And I think she said, there weren't any incidents, and it could have easily been one. It just doesn't take much to create an incident when there's like black and white people, especially if there was alcohol being served. I don't know. This last section was a lot. I think I'm gonna have to reread it. Just a lot of, even the lawyer Taylor, the black guy, they just barred him. And she said, I have no doubt that the charges were a direct response to him trying to, help our parents. I don't know. I'm going to have to reread that. That one was a lot. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
There's that V word again. Vindictive. Even it seems like they won the case, like they triumphed. We rocked them. We showed them. We got the property, and we made them broke niggers pay the legal costs. They couldn't just be happy and, we go off and do our renovations and evict these niggers and, be happy and go around. No. We're going to disbar this nigger too. Vindictive. Lots of that. That may be the word for the week. Since we even against the children. Vindictive. That was against white children. Vindictive. Before I get to some of my notes, like I said, I was thinking of climate change, right? Because they kept talking about hurricanes, and we just had the fires in California at the beginning of the year, and I said this time last year, I finished my stay in California, and I said climate change is going to take all of this, and then we were literally days away from the wildfires. And it continues even. Wilmington, North Carolina. I just looked. What does it say? It says Freeman Beach is not projected to be completely underwater by 2100, but it will likely experience significantly more frequent and severe flooding due to sea level rise and chronic inundation. Experts predict substantial sea level rise along the North Carolina coast, which could make beaches like those around Wilmington unlivable due to chronic flooding and erosion. It says significant sea level rise. Sea levels are predicted to rise by a minimum of 1.7 feet by the year 2100. We are now on 2030, so it's not that far away. If you have children, depending on the next global pandemic or such, they should be around. Now, I don't know if they'll be around and be able to live at the beaches in Wilmington, Freeman Beach. Maybe not. Maybe they can go look. But I just checked to see what's in the news for Freeman Beach. Okay, so this is from October 13. Today is October 17. Freeman Park expected to reopen this week following erosion-related closure. That's what they were talking about with the sea level and beaches, and high tides. More of the floods and all of that. So, matter of fact, when they said that they might put a statue there to honor the Freedmans, they probably put it in one of the low tide areas, so they know it's going to be inundated in a matter of 10, 20 years. You won't be able to see it at all. You come down to the beach on one of the days where it's clear, maybe you be able to see the top of, what is that? You see that little thing sticking out of the water? The bird sitting? What is that right there? Oh, that's the statue for the Negro's property. Okay. Shame. It's underwater now. We can't even take a picture. Oh, well. That's what it doesn't get any better than tacky. And for this week, vindictive. Let's see. The notes that I took quickly for chapter 6. I can't say enough cahoots, where white people worked together. And this is one of them little towns. White people work together the same way that they worked together in the Purge 1898. White people work together to steal property. And in fact, that's what NDB Connolly told us during his visit in 2015. He said white people, they have refined their methods for stealing black property. They used to go and kill all the black people and have a big orgy of violence. They don't have to do it that way anymore. Now they can just raise property taxes or just make it real civil. Put on a suit and tie and go to court. Now, Leroy, the property boundary said, you know, that old type. They don't have to be barbaric about it now, but they are just as lethal with snatching Negro property. Let's see. Black people were not permitted to swim in the ocean fronting Carolina Beach. Now, we talk all that about, dang, black people can't swim and black people can't drown. Blah, blah, blah. They don't even let you swim in the ocean. What? How? What? And they talk about all this. They restrict access to how you can get to the beach and blah, 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 all that. They wouldn't even let her dad get a building permit. All of this, you know, to be a black entrepreneur, all of the same things would apply. If you're a black person, you still got to go to the same people to get a building permit, to get a loan, a liquor license. All of that would still apply. You're going to go past the bar, white people. Let's see. I do find it amazing as well, like when she's going through these the time period of when these events are happening, like 1954's landmark, the Brown v. Board of Education decision, which would have ramifications on Evelyn Williams and Assata and everything that we're talking about, and the intense racist backlash to that, Strom Thurmond and many people that we know about, and that in this era they are displaying black self-respect and trying to get this property. I think that would also especially gall race soldiers at this time. Like, we already got enough of these uppity NAACP niggers running around here talking about they're going to go to school with our daughters and all the rest of it. And now you niggers talking about you going down to the beach. Next, it's our beach. It's our white sand. You don't come to our beach, tell us what to do. Have white people coming down and shaking their booty with you at the... Let's see. The shenanigans here are amazing, but again, you know, this is the whole system of white, and they've kind of perfected it at this point. We talk 1960 in terms of just stealing Negro property. You don't even have no black lawyers down here, so I mean, it's taking candy from a baby, literally, because we don't qualify as men and women. Let's see. When they hired the surveyors, I wonder, now they told us they don't have no black attorneys hardly. How many black surveyors did they have and or do they have now? That seems like another profession, and I don't know if you necessarily have to go to like an Ivy League school and you got to spend, you know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I would bet you probably don't have no whole lot of Lakeishas out there. Oh yeah, I'm an expert surveyor. I've been doing this for, 20 years. Like, really? My mom was a surveyor, and my great-grandma, and my grandpa, and we just passed them. Oh yeah, do this all the time. Got any property issues? Let me know. Really? I would be stunned. Right on for Fort Bragg. Let's see. They wouldn't even let him have a little stand to go out, little trolley type. That's to say, any sort of entrepreneur, even same thing. You just want to go out and get a little food truck. Now, you got to get a license. We heard that before. You even want to just do braids on your back porch in your kitchen. They got a whole lot of states. I think North Carolina might have been one of that. You get a license for that. Now, you just can't go put braids in somebody's hair because you Miss D'Angelo. You want to do a few cornrows. You got to get permission to do that. Permission from who? Usual suspects. I do. She's has so much that's admirable in the first little bit of the book that we've read. Even her using her time, she has access with her job at the New York University Law School. She's using her access and time to research North Carolina law. I mean, man, that is right on. Take advantage of the resources that you have, and all of that to help her black parents and black self-respect. Like, wow. But lots to admire with Evelyn Williams, and more to come. That's it. We'll wrap it up for this here week. We'll resume next Friday. Should be here tomorrow for the compensatory call-in, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. If you're not familiar with the 1819 Wilmington Purge, we've done a number of programs on it. There are documentaries, books, all kinds of goodies. Certainly, if you have connections to North Carolina, you should be super informed about this event. Again, wow, we have read 2 books where 2 black people have intimate connections to Wilmington and neither mentioned the Purge. That is how good. That is an indictment of white people, so I can make it plain. That is an indictment of racist man, racist woman, and racist child, because we've heard this before. White people do their campaigns of terrorism, kill untold. We can't even count how many niggers we killed. We don't even have graves. But I know one thing. I bet not hear you say a peep about all this. They said niggers were hiding in the swamp in Wilmington. You can't swim, but I know you'll get in that swamp if you think we coming to kill every nigger that moves. And that's what some of them had to hide in the swamp for like days. That's how you have generations of Wilmington Purge, huh? I think I heard, huh? Because Fuller said the same thing. Remember? Tulsa, that's some years later, he said the same thing. I thought we heard something. They mumbled, but shh. That's one painful habit we're going to have to break. Can't be now. If you don't know anything about it, obviously you can't say nothing, but we're going to have to break all that. Study all of this, be experts on all of this, so you can share this with your offspring, other victims of racism. That's one of the ways that white people keep us ignorant and exploit us, keeping us ignorant about what they have done to us. And us not talking about what they have done to us. Sobriety would be best. We heard that directly from the book. Staying sober. See, they come after the black people, they dump all the drugs on you, then come after you and put all these charges on you and sprinkle a little crack cocaine in it. Oh yeah, Leroy, he dropped a little cocaine. We saw him. We had that binoculars. None of that. Thank you kindly. Leroy ain't dropped nothing. Leroy is super duper sober. I don't even look at Mad Dog 2020. Creator, we ask, remind us, because we ain't heard no white allies in this book yet, have we? I don't think I heard no. It was some cool white people that looked out for my parents and really fought hard, did everything they could to keep their property. I ain't heard nothing like that. It was some cool white people in Cranberry. They weren't out to sodomize the niggers. I ain't heard nothing like that. Remind us to stop saying not all white people are racist. Stop producing throwaway offspring to be raped by Mary Kay Letourneau, drowned by Susan Smith, other white women, or Devontae stuff you in an institution. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.